Hello everyone. Welcome to today's Development Control Committee A meeting. Welcome to councillors, officers and members of the public who have joined us in the public gallery. This is obviously being webcast as well, so hello to everyone at home. Just going to do some introductions. I will just ask the committee members to just give their names. I can't remember, we usually do the officers as well. Do you want to do it as well? Okay, so should we start here from Jeremy and then go round?
Hello, I'm Jeremy Livitt from Democratic Services and I'm clerking the meeting.
Councillor Eddie.
Councillor
Councillor Guy Potney.
Classic.
Councillor Haikam Maghrabi.
Councillor Zoe Peat for the Avonmouth and Lawrence Western Ward.
Councillor Katja Hansjen.
Andy Cross, Planning Officer with Bristol City.
I'm from Development Management.
Okay, it always says safety information on the agenda and I never know what to read out. Is there anything specific I need to read out?
I think it's just the emergency evacuation procedure in case the alarm sounds. There isn't one plan, so you just need to exit and go near the cathedral if it does. I think that's it, Chair.
Thank you very much. And back to you again. Apologies for absence and substitutions is item 2.
Yes, Councillor Guy Poultney is substituting for Councillor Ellie Freeman.
Thank you very much. Do we have, on to agenda item 3, declarations of interest. This is to note any interests relevant to the consideration of items on the agenda. Has anyone got anything they'd like to declare at this stage? Yep, Zoe.
Obviously, I am the councillor for the Avonmouth and Lawrence Western Ward, so the application for the Goram is in my ward, but I will try to be as impartial as possible.
Yeah, you don't need to really declare an interest for something in the ward unless you've been with it. But, yep.
Great. Anyone else? Any other declarations? Great. So we'll move on to agenda item 4, which are the minutes of the previous Development Control A committee on 4th of September 2024. Anyone got anything they'd like to comment on about these minutes before I sign them off? It doesn't look like it. I would note that it does say that we resolved that the application on the Giant Goram be deferred pending further clarification about reasons for refusal and to look at policy DM6, again regarding viability and provision of wider community facilities, because that has relevance to this meeting, of course, because we are considering that again today. So I'll just sign the... Oh, sorry. Thank you. Do you like
I'll second
Thank you, Katja. Thank you for seconding it. Are we okay to agree that?
Yep.
Thank you very much. So moving on. Agenda item 5 is the action sheet. Even though we haven't got anything on here, I still think it's worth keeping it, because if we do, we will need to use something to keep track of actions. So I don't think there's much to say about that, as there's nothing on there. Agenda item 6 is appeals. Is there anything you'd like to say about this report, Jonathan?
Thank you, Chair. I don't think there are any particular decisions of note really to mention today, but we have actually received a few following the publication of this agenda, so there will be some that I will highlight at the next meeting, but I'm happy as ever to sort of follow up with any members if any decisions or any further information regarding any of the appeals would help.
Richard.
Item 4, page 7, 8 Stone Station Road, Charhampton. With my previous hat, I had some dealings with this. This is quite a contentious site. There have been, I think, 3 applications. This is a dismissal. I believe one may have been referred to DCB shortly. I'm not putting Jonathan on the spot now, but could he write to me update me, copying the 3 ward councillors, please?
Yes, I'd be happy to do that.
Right. Anything else? The appeals section, I have got something to note to myself, which is that of those applications that have been decided by the planning inspectorate that we initially refused, only one subsequent appeal has been allowed, which is quite good news from our perspective, I think, sort of reassuring that the delegated decisions that are being made are proceeding in an effective way in the most part. Anything else on appeals from anyone? No? Moving on to agenda item 7, which is around enforcement. Is there anything you'd like to say about this item?
I think really, again, I mentioned at the last meeting that we had a few notices that were ready to be served, and those are the 4 notices that appear under agenda item 7. All of those relate to unauthorised HMO use. So, yeah, really would just like members to note those notices.
Thank you. So we're just noting those. Anything else that anyone... Yep, Richard, go on.
Sorry, Chairman. Under the planning enforcement update sheet, the asterisk at the bottom talks about some items by being omitted, not investigated, because it's not deemed to be in the public interest. Who makes that decision?
So this is a decision that is a delegation, and essentially an assessment as to whether it would be expedient to take enforcement action or not, having regard to the authority's local enforcement
But
plan.
who makes it?
I believe that's a matter that's delegated to the chief planner.
Right.
Okay. Yep, go on.
Just to follow up on that, is there any formal sort of guidance or criteria that are used when making determinations? Document anywhere that says it's this versus this versus this. Is there guidance for the chief planner in doing so?
Yeah, so really the main would be the enforcement plan, and it will be our intention to hold a briefing for all councillors, which will probably be in the new year now. We're just actually looking at the civic diary just to sort of try and find a time that will work best. But our intention is to essentially provide an overview of enforcement and actually to say a little bit more about that.
Fab, Chair, that's something for the action sheet.
That is for the action sheet, I suppose, yes. Can we make note of that? Very good point. Good job of keeping it. So I wanted to say that it's good to know we are increasing resource to enforcement. I would say, without for a favour, there are 2 or 3 cases in my own ward where I do feel there's a substantial public interest in ensuring applicants deliver on their conditions and the content of their planning applications. And I think that's probably the case for a number of members as well. Moving on to agenda item 8, which is, of course, public forum. Just so everyone's aware, we take public forum, so that's statements and questions. Just statements. We'll take questions in a second. Immediately prior to the item in question, so apologies in advance for those who are here already and we'll have to wait through 1 or 2 items before we get to you. We appreciate your presence here in the public gallery. Please be patient with us if you can. I will be keeping strictly to 1 minute for public forum statements. And please also be aware that councillors have had sight of the public forum statements and representations. You just need to summarise the key points you'd like to make in the 1 minute you have. So don't feel you have to read out the statement necessarily ad verbatim. I think the first thing that on the agenda in public forum, sorry, I'll get my little list here, is questions, because we will take those ahead of everything, which are generally being asked here. So we've got questions 1, 2 and 3 from Joe Banks. I think the answers have been provided, and so I think in this process, Joe, if you'd like to ask up to 2 supplementary questions. Is Joe here? Sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you like to ask supplementary questions?
I haven't the answers to the questions.
They're on. Sorry, Chair. They are on the website. They're published on the website with the supplementary dispatch, which is
right. Okay.
automatically happens. So yeah.
Well, I don't know what the answers were, so I can't ask any supplementaries.
Would it be fair for me to suggest that we come back to the questions? Are you able to stay until the next item, ahead of the next item? It might take 30 minutes an hour and you can go and look at the question.
I can't, I'm afraid, no.
Okay. We can just read the responses out and then maybe we can take your... Yeah, okay. I think that's going to have to be what we do, unfortunately. just that will take a bit. Okay, I haven't got them in front of me.
Yeah. I'll read them, Chair. Just hang on a sec.
Yeah, go for it.
Just get them in front of me. So the first question was, recent Freedom of Information request shows that in February of this year, the Council responded positively to an invitation from the Office for Place to engage with them in the creation of new design codes for Bristol. What work has taken place in relation to the development of design codes since then? And the answer for this first question was the new local plan, which is currently being examined by planning inspectors, explains that its policies for delivering well-designed places will be supported by local design guides and codes which provide further detail of the design requirements for development. The emerging local plan includes an appendix which acts as a prospectus of the content of design guidance. Preparation of a local design guidance is commencing and community engagement will take place in due course. The Office for Place did not select Bristol for providing support in developing design codes. Whilst we draw on the Office for Place published resources and advice, we are needing to progress the work within our existing limited means. So I guess the question, do you want to ask a supplementary question for that answer?
That's fine, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so the second one, question 2, what is the process and criteria for deciding whether planning applications are determined by officers with delegated authority or by councillors on the development control committees? As set out in the Council's constitution, all the functions listed in the terms of reference to the development control committees are delegated to the Executive Director, Growth and Regeneration, except for the determination of any application where a member of the Council for award containing the site of the application requests the matter be determined by a Development Control Committee. Such request to be made on the appropriate referral form to one of the development management managers within the published consultation period for the application, specifying the planning grounds on which the request is made.
Thank you.
Did you want to ask any supplementary questions?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, and the final one, how does the Temple Quarter Enterprise Zone differ from the rest of the city in terms of how planning applications are handled by the Council as the local planning authority? And the answer was, planning applications across the city, whether within the Temple Quarter Enterprise Zone or outside, are handled by the Council as the local planning authority in accordance with the Town and Country Planning Act 1990.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Joe. And we will move on to, as I say, we take each item of on the agenda and then we do the public forum for it. So the agenda item 9A is 2 applications that we're considering together, and we'll get into how we will vote on that eventually. But the applications are 22/05268/F and 24/00202/LA, 38 Victoria Street, Bristol, BS1 6BY. And we will take the public forum. You're putting your hand up. Yep. Go on, guys. Sorry.
I'm so sorry, Chair. It's just to get a confirmation from officers in terms of the answer to question 2. Refers to the appropriate referral form having to be returned during the consultation period, is that right? Within the published consultation period for the application. Members call in for 7 days after the end of the process. And I just wanted to check in that would mean members would have to call it in before the end of the consultation period. Am I right? Or has it changed?
I'd be happy to provide some clarification. The procedure is there is a time period of 7 days following the end of the 21-day consultation period. So essentially, sort of 28 days from that being initiated to refer. The text that was actually provided for that answer was actually from the Constitution, but obviously on the referral form, it does allow for that extra 7 days after the end of the consultation period.
Okay. Moving on to agenda item 9A, we have 38 Victoria Street. So I'm going to take the public forum to start with. Let me get my sheet of the speakers. So the first statement, and I remind you again, just to speak within 1 minute, is Steve Bluff, but I believe that Andrew Smith is going to speak on Steve Bluff. So you have to make your statement.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. I'm reading this on behalf of Steve Bluff, Director of the Redcliffe and Temple Business Improvement District, which represents more than 250 local businesses. The bid fully supports this application. This is a highly sustainable redevelopment of a now obsolete building. Officing remains absolutely key to Bristol's economy, and the importance of the right type of office space cannot be overstated. The scheme would also bring additional spending to the many local hospitality businesses that ensure Redcliffe and Temple Quarter remain vibrant and attractive for Bristolians and visitors. The proposed public realm is also exactly what we need: accessible, open to all, welcoming and safe. We're particularly pleased the developer has spent time with the Cornubia's publicans and customers to resolve concerns resulting from changes to the pub garden. We applaud BBRE for how it has handled this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. The next statement from Samantha Hall. Is Samantha here?
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. My mum, Jackie, is the publican of the Cornubia and has been for the last 14 years. As a family, we fully support this planning application. The developer has spent a lot of time trying to ensure the proposal works for us, as well as for our lovely regular customers. Just to reassure you, the pub itself remains untouched, other than some new toilets, which are very welcome. What will change is our much-loved garden, because the reinstated historic street will go through the middle of it. However, BBRE's team has spent a lot of time with us and our customers, listened to our concerns and changed their plans. So our new garden will be as large as possible, with the same number of seats, an awning and with planting and fencing to help recreate the intimate feeling of our current garden. The BBRE team has been collaborative throughout, and the changes are a compromise, but one we're happy to support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samantha. Next statement is from Tim Belston. Is Tim here? Tim Belston.
Good evening. Per extension for the Cornubia's beer garden has been proposed, there will be a net loss of nearly 40% of the beer garden. With the proposed walkway being adjacent to the pub, pedestrians from Victoria Street will, from eye level, have a vertical field of view of the pub and its historic architecture. It will just look a plain wall. Nor will its banner, sign and name be visible. The banner is for view at a further distance. If the walkway was further away, outside the current beer garden, the pub would be more noticeable. Combined with the offices protruding so far onto Temple Street, the pub will be more hidden than at present from there.
Okay, could you draw your comments to a close?
Sorry?
Could you draw your comments to a close?
Sorry, I can't hear.
Oh, I said, could you draw... That's the end of the statement. You've had 1 minute. Is that okay? Sorry.
That's tied up, is it? Okay,
yeah. Okay. Moving on to the next statement, it's Chris.
Good evening. I work for and led the discussions with the Cornubia's publicans. We really appreciate the support of Jackie, Phil, and Jackie's daughter Samantha. I've spent a lot of time with them over the past few years, and it's clear that they're greatly loved by their regular customers. I'm sure that officers will explain that reinstating Long Row, the medieval footpath, through the site was set in policy, and something that we were obliged to deliver. Samantha has briefly explained to you how we've worked with the publicans and customers to address the impact of Long Row. We've amended our plans to provide a replacement garden that, as far as possible, matches what they want. Importantly, the pub itself is unaffected. Everything people love about the Cornubia will remain the same. The redevelopment will also bring more trade to the pub, helping ensure its long-term viability. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to the next stage is Roger Sabido.
I speak personally, but I support the concerns of the Bristol District Camera Pubs campaigning group around the effects on the cornubia. The reduction in garden area is close to 40%. This is a significant material loss of well-used customer space used to make the garden commodious and therefore attractive, and supporting the viability of a characterful, popular part of central Bristol. The design and build of the new offices can and should be done without compromising the character, amenity, appeal and viability of the cornubia and its existing environs. We must show respect for our unique heritage. It is something demanded and almost assumed in cities of our European neighbours. The gradual salami slicing away of our valuable urban character must be avoided. The development is undoubtedly supported, but it can be adjusted to accommodate the cornubia without affecting its appeal. Thank you.
Thank you. Statement is from Morris. Is Nigel here?
Yeah, I'm concerned about the pub caused and building work because it could affect the viability because of temporary closures and dust and noise and other issues. And also concerned about the reduced size and relocation of the garden because it's quite popular with office workers in the early evening, catching the last of the evening sun, the afternoon sun rather. The relocation of the bulk of the garden is to the shadow of Bristol House, so it reduces the outdoor sunlight because it's not in the sunny part of them, because it's in the shadow of the Bristol House now. And when you buy a house, you look for a south-facing garden. We're losing a garden that's sunny here for a garden that's in the shadow. And there also appears to be no parking, especially for disabled customers. The opening of Long Row to its previous location removes the best part of the garden, and Long Row could easily be relocated a few metres away from the pub and saving the garden basically in its current form.
Thank you.
Okay.
You've come to the end of your minute. Thank you very much. Next statement is from Matt Tucker. Is Matt here? Yeah.
Thanks very much. I'm a planning director at Savills advising on this application. I wanted to clarify the recommendation, which I'm pleased to say in the update sheet confirms that the application is recommended for approval subject to planning conditions and section 106. Should you approve this application, it will be deferred to the Secretary of State to see whether they wish to choose to call the application in, and that is a standard procedure as a result of the Historic England objection. As summarised in the officer's report, the public benefits of this scheme outweigh the less than substantial harm perceived by Historic England addressing their concerns. The benefits include, among others, the erection of a highly sustainable office, the doubling of the number of jobs, a 300+% biodiversity net gain increase, a new public garden space in front of Millwright's Place for residents, and the reinstatement of historical alignment of Long Row through the site. That latter feature is a planning policy requirement of the redevelopment of the site and is outlined in the Redcliffe Futures SPD. Thank you.
Thank you. The next statement from David Witcher.
Good evening, councillors. I'm Barrowmead, director responsible for this proposal. We've already spent tens of millions of pounds extensively refurbishing 2 office buildings in Bristol's city centre. These are Royal Talbot buildings on Victoria Street and Castle Park. As well as great placemaking, the key thing this third investment would deliver is space for 432 office workers, which is double the building's current capacity. Offices play a crucial role in Bristol's economy. However, post-pandemic changes in working patterns have created a 2-tier market, the best and the rest. Being blunt, anything below the highest standards risks becoming unlettable and boarded up, and without redevelopment, that's exactly what would happen to Canningford House. We submitted our application nearly 2 years ago. It's been a long wait, but we're pleased officers are recommending approval. We hope you'll also support our application so we can get started on this important investment in jobs and placemaking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To conclude the public forum for this. And so I think we're going to take the presentation from the Council Officer.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So, bringing to you a pair of applications for consideration this evening. So there's a full planning application for the redevelopment of Canningford House for a replacement modern office development of between 5 and 8 stories. Within the site lies the Cornubia Public House, which is a listed building, and there are alterations to that proposed in the form of a new replacement toilet block extension to the rear, as well as an altered beer garden. The listed building consent relates purely to the Cornubia, and that's focused simply on the physical works to the listed building. So on the screen now is a site location with the site between Victoria Street and Temple Street, and the Cornubia is within that area with the pub sign on there. And here are some shots of the existing site. So top left of your screen is the view from Victoria Street with mature London plane trees along the frontage. They're proposed to be retained. And then you can see the other shots are, and then below that is from the other direction on Victoria Street. And then the shots to the right-hand side of the screen are from Temple Street with the Cornubia pub and the existing tarmac apron and beer garden beyond. That's parking and servicing associated with the existing office building and also used by the public house on the site. The development proposal is for a modern office development of 5 to 8 stories, so 5 stories to the Victoria Street frontage, rising to 8 to the Temple Street frontage. You'll note on these CGIs, you'll notice that the London plane trees are not shown. That's purely so that the visuals of the development can be seen. They are proposed to be retained. As part of the development, the reinstatement of Long Row, which is an historic route that previously ran across the site beside the Cornubia pub, and public realm space in that area between the Cornubia and the office building. And I'll just show you some of the drawings. So this is the Victoria Street elevation, and at the bottom you can see the access to the Long Row, which actually goes beneath the building, 2 stories in height for visibility through, but wrapped by the office development proposed. This is the view from Temple Street to the rear with the Cornubia shown as well. And then this is the side elevation, so the Cornubia pub in the foreground and the proposed development. And you can see the stepped form between Victoria Street and Temple Street frontages. And then in terms of a site overview, this shows again the Long Row public route with the Cornubia retained, and also sets out the amended beer garden proposed, which at the moment is more to the side as well as the front of the Cornubia, and it's extending a long row more than the existing sort of side aspect of the beer garden. There's planting in the public realm, new cycle storage, and the main entrance to the office building would be from that space. On the Victoria Street frontage, there are 2 accesses into ground floor units there, with the application seeking a variable use class, so it could be occupied by classy uses. I'll come on to that in a bit. So in terms of public consultation, there were 51 objections to the initial submission and 1 letter in support. These objections principally related to impact upon the public house and the loss of the garden, and concerns about the viability of the pub as well. And following that process, in collaboration with the developers team, significant revisions were made to the Cornubia side of the proposals in expanding the garden space. It is smaller than the existing beer garden, but something that could accommodate a similar number of pub goers. There were also improvements made to the route through, this public walkway, increase in height, increased surveillance, better feel for the public realm in response to concerns for public safety that were raised as well. And the revised scheme that's come in has received far fewer objections than previous, with 3 objections and 4 in support. Again, the vast majority relate to concerns associated with the Cornubia pub rather than the office building itself, but some concerns of the design of the office building were raised. In terms of principle, the existing office building is not considered fit for purpose. It's been vacant for some time. It's dated and it's not desirable in current market conditions. The proposal would introduce high quality, modern, sustainable office space that is in demand and is supported by colleagues within the City Council Economic Development team. It aligns with current market trends for this sort of accommodation. There are also enhancements to the public realm, and the opening up of Long Row accords with aspirations for enhanced movement through the area as set out within in the local SPD. And also there are enhanced facilities provided for the pub as part of the proposals in the new toilet block, which also includes accessible toilet facilities, which I believe the pub currently doesn't benefit from. There's also increased footfall past the pub would help in terms of its visibility in the public and hopefully support its viability going forward. In terms of the design of the proposals, the stepped form works as a bridge really between Victoria Street frontage with modern developments along there of a similar height, 5 stories, and then to the rear at Temple Street where recent developments step up, and the 8-storey height proposed accords with the adjacent development opposite. There has, however, been concern raised by Historic England and also our conservation officers of the impact of this in terms of certain views. This is probably the principal view of concern. This is taken from Temple Gardens. This is a grade 2-star listed ruined church. So it's high significance in terms of its heritage value. And the office development would be visible above its silhouette in the background. This is one of the principal views that's led to concerns raised by Historic England and also our conservation officers. Perhaps if I rock that back and forth a little bit so that you can see the difference. It is a fleeting view. You have to stand in that specific location within Temple Gardens to read it. And the main public route through Temple Gardens is actually to the left of this picture where you can see the trees and there's a footpath that runs between them, and you don't actually get this particular angle from there. There are also, this is not a rendered image like the other one that was requested specifically in more detail there, because this is the key view of concern. There would also be some impact from counterslip at the junction of Temple Street, where the top of the tower would no longer be visible. Again, this is just a particular moment in time as you're passing through the area. And also from Victoria Street, the proposal would be significantly of greater scale and mass than the existing development, and some concern has been raised of the setting of the buildings to the right-hand side in the foreground, which are also listed. I think it is important to realise that this is an area of change, and the context contains several heritage assets, but also a lot of modern development, and it is a city centre area with a juxtaposition of historic and modern developments. but it is agreed with Conservation and Historic England that there would be less than substantial harm to the setting of these heritage assets. That harm must be weighed against the public benefits of the proposal. And as was mentioned in one of the public forum statements, public benefits can be seen as a modern office development that's fit for market demand. There's the opening up of the public route between Victoria Street and Temple Street, which is a local policy aspiration, enhanced public realm, which could arguably support the ongoing viability of the Cornubia. Increased biodiversity gains, placemaking, as has been mentioned, and it's felt this safeguards the viability of the Cornubia. You'll see from my report that my recommendation is for approval. It's my view that these public benefits outweigh the heritage impacts, but because of the Historic England objection, if members are minded to agree with that recommendation, it would need to be referred to Secretary of State to see if they wish to call in the application. I think on other matters, perhaps if we can save it for questions, but the other thing I did want to just quickly show as well is the proposals for the Cornubia replacement toilet block. So at the moment there is it's again a flat-roofed single-storey extension, which is a later addition to the building. During the course of the application, different options were put forward, and the option that's shown here was that favoured by our conservation officer. It provides enhanced facilities for the Cornubia, including accessible toilet facilities and also a rear door to assist with the accessible access from the beer garden. And I think perhaps I'll leave it at that, and if there are any specific questions on other matters, we can discuss those as we get to them. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Thank you. I think just before we start with questions from the committee, can we just make clear that on the documentation it says refer to Secretary of State as the recommendation. Of course, that means to clarify, approve and refer to Secretary of State.
Yeah, which I added to the amendment sheet. Apologies if that was not clear. Yeah. That's a process matter rather than the actual recommendation. So yeah, my recommendation is for approval, subject to the conditions set out, a few of which have been tweaked on the amendment sheet, but the content's pretty much the same. It's just subtleties of the wording.
Okay, thank you. And is it this the moment to clarify the exact process for deciding? Because this is obviously two applications, whether the committee is minded to take two votes, if you see what I mean. So we're approving both of the, depending on what we decide, our decision has to be taken on both applications rather than taking them both.
Correct, yeah. And as I mentioned, the listed building application purely relates to physical works to the Cornubia. That does not need to be referred to the Secretary of State, and then the full application is for the whole. So that's the office development, the public realm, and the Cornubia. And if members are minded to approve that, then that needs to just be put in front of the Secretary of State.
Okay. Has anyone got any questions or clarification points? I had Serena, and then Sarah, and then Guy.
Thank you, Chair. Very much enjoyed drinking in this pub. It's a fantastic pub. Happy memories there. I have some questions, though. I don't think this was discussed just now about the sustainability aspect. It seems, and I could be wrong, the impression I got when I was reading your officer's report, that it's a little bit unambitious in its targets, and that there may be a significant amount of offsetting because possibly the design isn't as sustainable as it could be in terms of heat and the rest. I don't know what your comment would be on that. I'd be interested to hear a bit more.
Yeah, so there are a number of proposed. So the heating system for the office is proposed as to have a day one connection to the local district heat network. So that's a sustainable heating system from the get-go. To the roof there is a 200 square metre area of solar PV panels, providing electricity for the development. With a development of this sort of scale, it's quite difficult to achieve our 20% carbon reduction from on-site renewables if you're looking at PV, purely because each story you add, you don't get a larger roof area. So in terms of the carbon offset, it's meeting about 11% of an 11% reduction in CO2 from residual energy demand. Our policies ask for a minimum of 20%. So there is a shortfall, and one of the planning obligations that's set out in Section 106 is an offset payment for that shortfall. So that covers a 30-year period at price per tonne of carbon, which is paid as a financial contribution to go towards other sustainable measures off-site to claw that back, essentially.
Yeah, just come back quickly, yeah.
I have a quick follow-up. There was also the issue of potential overheating because of the glass curtain design. I don't know if I got that terminology right. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, that's something, and during the course of the application, it's something I'd asked for. The proposal weren't in relation to that. In terms of the overheating, the building shouldn't overheat because there is mechanical ventilation system. That's not the most sustainable way of achieving it because there's an energy draw from that. That energy draw is factored into their calculations. So for the solar PV and the carbon offsetting payment does account for that mechanical ventilation system. So our policies don't specifically require prevention of overheating, but any measures have to be factored into those calculations. So it's sort of wrapped up in that shortfall and the carbon offset payment.
Okay. Sarah, Guy, and I think I had George put under.
Thank you. Just about the building, how does that actually compare to the other buildings around it, specifically the part that's sort of 8 stories? And I noticed that in the report it says the current building is between 3 and 6 stories. So how, because it looks quite imposing, and obviously you mentioned in your presentation that it is a concern. So I just wanted to check how it compares to the rest of the street.
Yeah, the 8-story into street has been designed to accord with the height of the adjacent development on the other side of Temple Street. So it's the same there. In terms of Victoria Street, there is a bit more variation with some historic buildings and some more modern office, but that 5-story to the frontage is fairly consistent with more modern developments along Victoria Street. So it's been designed to sort of try and match with both sides of the site, as it were.
Thanks. Guy, and then George, I think. And then...
Thank you. Just a process question into the referral to the Secretary of State based on one of the outcomes. Possibly this is because it's coming from someone who spent a lot of time being briefed about the risks of appeal and the need for very, very solid reasons for very solid reasons for making the decisions that we do. And I'm just wondering, when the Secretary of State looks at this case, if they do, does any of our discussion here have any bearing on that? In other words, is the Secretary of State in any way assessing our reasons for granting or not in light of the objection from English Heritage? Or is it just that they look at the situation fresh?
I suppose it depends. You are very different to what's written in the report that I prepared and put to you all. I think that report sets out my assessment in collaboration with consultees and others involved. And if you feel that you want to support the application, but perhaps not in quite the same way, I suppose you could put an additional statement to the Secretary of State. But if you're agreeing with the officer recommendation, then that report is put to Secretary of State, and they have the options of either saying no, we don't want to look any further, we're fine for the local authority and councillors to determine, or they have the option to say, actually, we too want to take a closer look at it and do their own additional assessment.
Okay, I think I had George next. Do you want to ask a question?
So, a couple of questions actually. I wanted to ask, the toilets inside Cornobius, are they going to change or be moved? And the disabled toilets are on the outside. I'm just thinking, in terms of English weather, it's very common, but it rains. Is it right that disabled people have to go outside and through the rain to the toilet? I'm just querying that. Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't actually put for the toilet facilities in the presentation. So the disabled toilet's not outside. So there's male, female, and accessible toilets within the rear extension block. The existing internal access from the pub into the toilets remain, and all of the toilets can be accessed that way. There is also an additional access to the rear because I think internally access is tricky through the pub anyway. So that existing route through to the new toilets will remain, but then an additional route that some may find preferable is also added, but the only way to get that in is externally. So 2 routes to the same facilities.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Katya, yeah, go on.
I just wanted to ask about the glass curtain wall. You already said about internals of to overheat the building, but will it affect the surrounding area? Has that been thought about? Because sometimes I don't know that much about it, but I have heard that glass walls can heat up the local area outside the building.
I'm not sure actually. I've not seen any of it. So we haven't had an overheating assessment submitted, and that isn't something I've looked at as part of the proposals. No.
Okay, any other questions anyone's got? Let's come to you, Al, because we haven't had you yet, and then Serena.
Sure. Thank you. There was a complaint raised about the building blocking the sunlight in the evenings, and I wanted to ask how many months of the year would that happen? Because obviously there's a winter where there's not much sunlight and spring. So yeah, I'd just like to ask about that. Yeah, wouldn't.
Yeah, it's in terms of how long of the year, I'm not sure. A lighting impact assessment was submitted as part of the application.
Yeah.
So that was based on BRE standards, which looks at different ways of looking at light entering adjacent rooms. I think, are you referring to the building opposite on Temple Street on the other side?
Actually, the about the pub. So yeah, about the pub. If you know that.
If I refer to my report, I think I put something in there. I think the largest element of the building is to the north of the pub.
Okay.
But the works immediately to the rear of the pub have increased in height compared to existing. there's already a very close relationship between the two. But you're right, it does have increased number of stories to the rear. Impact on the pub was covered in the lighting assessment that was put in.
I think
Right.
that bit, unfortunately.
Let's have a look. I think the impact on the Cornubia was not particularly different to existing from memory. Right, so there were 14 rooms were tested, and that was at 33 Victoria Street and 142 Temple Street. So one of those is the Cornubia, and it said 100% all of those will achieve BRE's recommended targets.
Sure, yeah.
So that doesn't necessarily mean there won't be any reduction in light.
Yeah.
But where there is a reduction, it's within BRE acceptable standards.
Yep, sure. That's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Let's get to the last few questions. I think, Zoe, you had your hand up and then Serena, if that's all right. Yeah, but you've not spoken yet, so if you go. Oh, it's been answered. Okay, great. Zoe, go ahead.
In to the report, loss of light in the smaller garden will affect the viability. How is that actually assessed? Like, how did they come to the conclusion that a smaller garden with less light will not affect the viability?
So there's more to it than just the size of the garden. I think one of the things that's been aimed at was a garden that can accommodate as many pub goers as the existing garden, albeit smaller. The extent of seating that's shown on the plans that's come in details the same amount of seating as the existing garden, but of course a smaller area you can physically fit fewer people in. So in theory the existing garden could seat more people. I think viability is not as straightforward as that though, because the proposals will increase footfall past the pub. It would become more visible because of that. There's an introduction of a building that's going to accommodate office workers that, it's a perfect place for a local pub, isn't it, on a Friday after work. So, and the enhancements to public realm as well, be more attractive place for people to go. Perhaps people will investigate it that have not been there before. So I think there are more subtleties as well as purely the amount of available space.
Can I do a follow-up?
Yeah, quick, yeah.
So can you walk me through, go, okay, we're going to aspect 10, this one a 3, and then you add it all together? I want to know how you determine whether something passes the viability. That's the bit that I feel like I have a blind spot with. I can see, oh yes, it's viable, but I want to know how you come to that conclusion and work out what's the equation or the algorithm you're using.
I don't think it's as simple as a mathematical equation. Am I all right to bring you in, Jack? This is Jack Allen, one of our economic development team at the council.
I must admit, I don't think there is an equation that sits behind it that we have applied in this instance. I think something that we would tend to be very much advised and influenced by would be the view of the operator of the pub itself and their judgment as to whether the pub could continue in operation following the changes that are proposed there. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, I think do you want to ask what is it you want to ask? There you go. Okay. Guy, and then I'm going to ask one question, and I think we need to move on to the discussion, okay?
Thanks, and apologies for this a while ago. It was just appreciating there isn't any residential development particularly involved in the quantum of this specific decision, but I was just slightly worried about agent of change. And is there anything that we could potentially amend to the conditions or the decision to ensure that the pub, in essence, would be immune from any complaints about noisy punters or cooking smells or anything else that sort of threatened it in the future, both in planning or licensing terms.
Okay, I mean, normally with agent of change stuff, I think you're most likely to get noise as part of evening economy, which is going to be the period of time that the fewest people are likely to be occupying the office space. That's not to say no one will be working late or whatever. I'm not sure how we could address that in terms of a condition. I'd say it's probably unusual for an office development, but if you've got suggestions of how you might seek to address it.
Have you got a suggestion, Guy, or I don't know how to.
I'll have a ponder and have a quick glance through some of our previous considerations and see if I can find.
Okay, Serena, go on.
All I was going to add was that there may be a future scenario where that building, who knows, is converted into flats. And so I think there does need to be some sort of protection agent of change. I think it's really, really important for that pub.
I mean, any conversion to residential in the future would not be subject to application anyway. It's probably also worth bearing in mind that although the existing building proposed to be demolished is vacant, that is an existing office building that has basically the same relationship with the Cornubia, albeit with fewer potential occupiers.
Okay, did you have another question?
Sorry. With the rise of flex and working from home, giant block of office spaces, really, are we sure that's going to be profitable?
I think if it's all right, could we take that as a subject of the debate in a second? Because I think that's what we discuss. But I mean, is that all right?
Whatever you think's better.
Yeah, rather than.
Jack's here if you want to hear from him.
Oh, okay, go on then. Yeah, go on.
Thank you. I mean, the advice that we're getting from office agents operating in the market is that whereas possibly numbers, footfall going into offices may have gone down, the requirement for office space still exists, and the requirement for a new type of office space that offers a slightly different product to the market has been building up. It was happening before COVID hit in, before the pandemic hit in, and it has continued. So whereas it is very hard to tell actually where we stand in terms of the footfall of people coming into offices at the moment. I couldn't give you a steer on that. We're certainly being told that there is still a demand for new office space because the nature of requirements have changed, and it's not always the case that existing offices can actually meet those new requirements.
Okay, I'm going to ask a very quick question, then we need to move on, I think, to the debate. So my question is just from something in the officer's report. There were concerns raised by Transport Development Management regarding the proposed design of the cycle store, given no accessible cycle parking has been provided. I think there was a request to put that in a condition, maybe there wasn't. Was that put into a condition? I didn't see it, it may be there.
It could be, if you wish to. So there are two lots of cycle storage. One is the public cycle storage in the public realm. That is proposed as, I don't know if you can quite see them, you can, in the top right image they're shown there. So those are Sheffield stands, which is like the...
Can't see them.
Oh. Oh, where's that gone?
It's all right if you don't need to.
Sorry, it's on my screen. Yeah, the public cycle parking is Sheffield stands, which is Transport Development Management's preferred because they're easiest to use and they're secure. For the office development, two-tier rack system is proposed throughout, with the number of cycle parking spaces exceeding our policy requirements. There we go, back on the screen. So there is potential for that to be amended to provide fewer spaces, but some of those be of Sheffield stands, which could be secured by condition if members wanted to. Or, as it's presented at the moment, there are a greater number to serve the office development, but none of which are Sheffield stands.
I think my concern is just about there being an accessible space for a few accessible spaces for people who are going to work at the offices who may be disabled but can still cycle.
Yeah, a condition can be added if.
Okay. Do we do that in this process, or can you do that after the fact?
So as part of the decision making, so I can, okay. if that's the way things go, then I can draft something. Yeah.
Okay. Brilliant. Thanks. I think we do need to move to the debate. Richard's got his hand up straight away. He didn't ask a question. I think I'll go to him straight away.
In my view, even a passionate devotee of the 20th century society would be hard-pressed to defend 97 as a house. It's clearly a tired 50-plus-year-old office block, unsustainable in energy terms, not appealing to the modern marketplace. This scheme, to me, looks well-designed scheme. It's moved forward very positively. It's sustainable. There's significant increase in BNP. We've heard doubling of the employment spaces. We have the public realm improvements and the reinstatement of the historic street, which is positive. I'm very encouraged. I noticed that several colleagues expressed knowledge of the pub, and I'm very pleased they've used it in the past. It does seem to me the new public realm, the historic space opening up of the site is going to potentially give it a lease of life. So I'm reassured by that, and also by the case officer's clarification about the size. Vis-a-vis Historic England's objections, I'm afraid I've sat here for a number of years, many years, and I've always had a robust attitude about defending Bristol's historic assets. And that's perhaps partly viewed that the Malline in my family have lived here for 500 years, but not me, surprisingly, despite what Councillor Tom Reynolds says. But I have to say, I have been concerned about the quality judgments made by Historic England to us in recent years. I mean, frankly, I would view them on the same level as a chocolate teapot. In my view, they don't carry water, hot or cold. And I would hope we have to, if we grant this, which I hope the committee will do, refer it to the Secretary of State. But I trust he'll accept the well-argued report of the case officer and our endorsement and grant it.
Thank you, Richard. I think I saw Guy next.
Thank you, Chair. I sounded of agreement with my colleague at the end of the bench on this one. It's really gratifying to look through the documents in the run-up to this hearing and the history of this application to see just how responsive the developer has been to the community consultation, to the suggestions from the planning officer, to the input from the ward councillors. The development has noticeably improved as it's come along. It strikes me as a good example of how engagement is done really, really well and how a local authority can genuinely improve an application as it goes along. And I do just... I've been drinking in the Cornubia myself, although ashamedly not that much lately, but I just wanted to say how much I was impressed by the architecture on this particular scheme. It's a really, really good-looking building. And I think Historic England's objection in this case is really quite, I don't want to wind them up because I appreciate they'll be talking to the Secretary of State about it, but safe to say I agree with what Councillor Eddy's assessment was earlier. I think to criticise this on the basis of what was there before is and seemingly with so much emphasis on the failure to better emphasise the heritage that's already there. Really, it's the time to make that case, I think, was probably about a quarter of a century ago in relation to this particular property. So at the moment, I'm wholeheartedly voting yes and wholeheartedly supporting the officer's recommendation.
Okay, thanks. Then Al.
I'd like the idea of the way it's changing, because I do think cities change, and this takes into consideration that the city has a past and somehow brings in the more modern, which is what we didn't do in the 1970s when the other building was built. Then we just plonked them there, which I quite liked. I liked your point about the cycle charging, and I've had this before. Sometimes people with disability scooters or something can't park need space to park their scooters, and also need charging points with fire safety. That's something that's very new to me. I just come across it in some of my casework. So cargo bikes or other things, to have space for them as well. I was very glad that the pub was in agreement with this, so there wasn't like a big fight about this. So the pub was in agreement, they consulted with them, and it seemed like they're happy with the idea. They're losing a bit of garden space, but at the same time, you can actually see their pub now from Temple Street, no, Victoria Street, the main road, which is quite nice. One of the questions, I would have asked this as a question, but I do hope it's more of a hopeful thing, that there will be archaeology they'll discover down there, I'm quite sure, when they start digging up again. And it would be really nice if in some way, in some architectural way or in some artistic way, you included in that pathway the history of, so people when they walk down, they might, I don't know how, that's up to the designers and the artists, how they would incorporate what they find down there and what it used to be before, even the 1970s building, if that makes sense, and then now it's going to be before this building. That would be quite nice, because it's something to talk about and love to be in. Creates an environment, if that makes sense, a space.
Thanks. Al, go ahead.
So I just like to say, I'm glad that there's solar panels there. I'm glad that they're paying to offset the carbon. That's like great. I completely agree with all of the points from the other councillors. Yeah, they all made like really strong points, and I agree with them. And it's also great that the report was so strong and detailed, and you want to do our questions to a high degree, so that's like great too. And I'd also like to say it's good to see a developer actually working with the community and actually taking their thoughts and ideas on board. So yeah, I'll be voting for this project. Thank you.
Great. Anyone else want to? Sarah first, won't you? Sorry, then Sarah, then.
So I'm still very undecided, to be honest, and I think I'll be very undecided until the vote. And this is why I actually did a site visit today, and I went down and I spoke to some of the patrons, and I know in the report it said that there was support, and actually I had no support there. So although the building itself, the Canningford, looks amazing, the design is really good, I'm very impressed with the community engagement that's been done. There's just this voice in the back of my head being very hesitant to agree. But that's for me to decide. Thank you.
Thanks. Sarah and then Serena.
Thank you. I broadly in agreement with those who have already spoken. I think this is an example of a very good application that's come through. The engagement and the level of detail has been really good. And also the engagement with the pub. You know, quite often what comes in is people going, well, we haven't been consulted, it's going to affect our business, and to actually see that engagement has happened, right down to, I don't know if anyone's checked their post slots down in their group rooms, because I had a nice 4-page brochure when I got in this today from the developer. Have a look out for that if you haven't checked your post in a while, which addressed a lot of concerns that we might already have. I know that it's come up briefly about whether there is viability for office space now with the sort of post-pandemic world where people are flexible working, but it's important to remember that home working isn't, just because for a lot of people it is preferable, it isn't always the preferable option, and it also isn't always a viable option for every business. Just to give a bit of an example, I actually, when I first started as a councillor, I was also working for a pensions admin company literally opposite this building. And as they're dealing with pensions admin, they're dealing with hard copies of death certificates, marriage certificates, all of those things. And so they needed a physical presence in an office where people could take those documents, put them, scan them, and then send them back to people. That wouldn't work with home working. So not every industry can actually support home working, and office buildings are still necessary in our city. And as it's been brought up previously, that area has had a lot of change in recent years. There's been a lot of development, and our buildings need to change with it. Where things are starting to be not fit for purpose, we do need to kind of look at that, and I think this is an example of a really good application, so I will be voting for it.
Thank you. Serena.
Well, I have to say it's great to see a new development proposal that's going to help an pub for once, and I'm really pleased to see that the access to the pub will be opened up and hopefully will bring increased footfall. I am concerned, though, that about the bulk and massing of the proposed development, as it's 8 stories, I think, at the back, so it does seem to be boxing the pub in. And at the back of my mind is always this, which sounds a bit cheesy, but I think we are the guardians of Bristol's heritage. You know, it's his historic skyline. It's our job to get the best and to make sure that heritage isn't harmed. And you always have to challenge, I think, and say, is this good enough? To ask all of us to strive for excellence, especially as this is one of the city's oldest areas. But in balance, I do think that this is a good beneficial development. I think there are benefits. I think it's much better than what's there before. And as I say, I'm very pleased to see that we'll be giving a central historic city pub a much needed boost. So I will be voting for. Thank you.
Thanks, Serena. Zoe, did you want to?
Not really a debate item. I just want to thank the presenting officer for speaking in terms in a way that's easily understandable and being direct with his answers. It's nice to see for once.
Thanks, Zoe. Just make a comment that I really like the opening up of Long Row. I think that's got great potential for this area. I think it opens the space up. It gives it more opportunities to thrive. Obviously, the pub's being retained. I'd say it's probably going to be improved. It's going to change, and that's difficult for people who use the pub. And I take on board what you said, George, about not everyone's okay with the way this has been done. But I think the proposal does increase its viability. I think in sort of straightforward economic terms, it's hard to disagree with that. I wasn't. I actually had written down here the design of the scheme is a functional office building, which kind of sort of is slightly different to what Guy was saying over there. I can't get that excited about any office building, but it's state of the art. It looks pretty good. It's nothing to object to. The height is a bit higher than I'd like it to be. You know, call me puritanical, but that isn't on balance a refusal reason. And I think that the benefits of this development are clear to see. So has anyone got anything else they'd like to add in the debate section? Okay, maybe we will move, and I will move. Let me get my little thing up that I like to keep up because then I'm clear about what I'm doing. So I'd like to move a motion in accordance with the recommendation, which is to approve this and refer it to the Secretary of State. Would another committee member like to second that?
Seconded, Chairman. Do you want to add, could I ask your point about
parking? Sorry, completely forgot about the point about condition. I think there was another one about agent of change. I don't know whether you want to propose condition on that, or is there
I'm not going to start talking about noise easements, Chair. There isn't anything, but I am mindful that the authority is reconsidering its licensing policies from next week. So
Thank you for that.
Take it up there.
Thank you for that reminder, Richard. Yes, is it all right to put that condition in?
Yeah, so there is a cycle storage condition on there which I can reword. So just to confirm, is to have a number of accessible cycle spaces for the office. I know cycle charging was mentioned. Is that
for the mobility scooters? Sorry, because I've come across this before. For an able person with their electric bike, you can yank your battery out quite easily and go upstairs and charge it in the office while you're working. But I've noticed this with some of the elder people I've been working with in my own ward, is that they don't have anywhere to park their mobility scooters and they need to charge it. And then there's this huge thing about because it's a fire hazard as well, apparently. So you can't just leave it and charge it anywhere. So and that was the thing, if you could, I don't know if you can do it on this particular thing, but it might be something we start looking into, of where you can have one or two places where you can put mobility scooters, because they don't have the ability to yank the battery out and take it upstairs, if you see what I mean.
If that's something we can do in a condition.
But it might be, I don't know if this is the right one here.
if it's something you would like,
Let's just
then we
investigate.
can, yeah, and I can liaise with the developers team over the wording.
Okay. Yes, good reminder from Jeremy over my shoulder that we do need to vote on both of the different applications. So should we start with...
I think you were starting with the second, sorry.
Yeah.
Starting with the Secretary of State one?
Yeah, start with the Secretary of
referral?
State one, which is the bulk of it, if you see what I mean. Yeah. So I was going to move the proposal to go with the officer recommendation. Is anyone seconding?
Yeah, that was already seconded.
That was already seconded?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just go round in turn, just to say whether you're for or against that proposal. So I'll just start. I'm for. Richard?
For.
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 That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. And then let's, I'll move the recommendation for the second application. Would anyone like to second that?
Yeah.
Guys seconding that, okay.
I'll second that.
Oh, sorry, Al, were you first? Okay, Al can second that one. And we'll just go around again. I'm saying I'm in favour.
For.
Yeah, for.
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 Once again, unanimous, Chair.
Right. Thank you very much. I think that concludes that item, so permission is granted. And we'll have a 5-minute break between items, just because that's been quite long. We'll come back at 7:25.
Precisely.
Hopefully. Only 3 minutes late. Well done. So we're going to move on to agenda item 9B. The applications to do with the full application and the listed building application for the Old Tavern. We're going to take public forum to start with. And the first, remember please that you have 1 minute to speak. The first statement is by Susan Strickland, but she's unable to attend. So Keith Ettel, I believe, is in the room, who's able to speak to this one. Go ahead.
Oh, right, okay. I've lived in Blackberry Hill for about 55 years, so I know the area fairly well. I consider the development to be totally inappropriate for the area and for the property, which was built in 1877. It's intended for students who now almost fill up Small Lane, the houses at the back, which once council houses. The students don't bring anything to the community at all. They're there, not there half the time. The architecture of the proposal is very poor and lacking in any quality to my mind. I don't know anything about buildings, but there we are. They say that the parking will increase, that the students will have cars. I don't believe it. The survey was carried out, it's at saturation point now, and the survey in Blackberry Hill was carried out during the holiday time of Christmas for UE. So what a waste of time. The police and the development, they say, I don't think that would be successful. And if they're going to throw people out if they use their cars and God knows what. How the hell are they going to do that? Where's the law for that?
Okay, your minute is up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next statement is from Councillor Lorraine Francis.
Okay, I strongly oppose the development. There is, I cannot account the amount of houses of multiple developments in the area. Just along Small Lane to the left, there are 52 accommodations, literally about 50 metres down the road, which are HMOs or student accommodation. And on Small Lane itself, there is at least, of the 20 properties, at least 10 of those are HMOs as well. It's not acceptable. It's a really dangerous road. It's right on the corner. The pictures in the brochures does not show you the reality of that area. There's lots of flooding when that takes place, and it is not appropriate. There has been no offer of residential accommodation. Instead, a 32-bedded HMO for students. That is not in the best interest of the ward. It's not in the best interest of the residents. So I am strongly opposing this development. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. The next statement is from Dave Wedgwell, but he's unable to attend. There may be Nigel Morris. Great.
A couple of pages, so I shall have a go. Yeah, it was, as mentioned earlier, the parking survey was not really done properly because it was done when there weren't any students around, so it doesn't seem to be very valid. There's also talks, the objection also talks about the parking issues and how there's discussion about how people will be fined for taking cars into the area, which seems to be extremely impractical. There's a lot of concerns about the general parking issues, delivery trucks and fast food deliveries for students, getting takeaways constantly, in addition to any student cars. There's no bus service on Sunday, which is probably also going to increase the traffic from Uber taxis and other delivery vehicles. It's just very crowded in the area, and there's insufficient capacity for the extra on the streets within 150 metres walking distance to accommodate all the parked cars that will be generated by the development, and the area would be overwhelmed by the parking impact of the development.
Okay. Thank you very much for that statement. The next statement is from Becky or Paula Baker. Are either of you here? No. Okay. And then we've got one from Maddie Ashton. Is Maddie Ashton here? Front row there.
We really care about our local community. We have lived within it for 19 years. We used to frequent the Old Tavern pub with neighbours and friends before it shut down. The Old Tavern is the only community space in our very mainly residential and well-populated part of Stapleton. This listed heritage building has not been cared for recently. The state of disrepair has encouraged vandalism, parking of living vehicles, and more recently squatters who resided in the building for quite some months. The proposal only seeks to provide student accommodation and does nothing to improve nor contribute to our local community in a positive way. Local residents struggle to manage the day-to-day reality of high volumes of traffic, parking pressures and road safety issues on Blackberry Hill, Small Lane and beyond. We are amongst many local parents of children at Bristol Met Academy concerned about road safety, particularly relevant given the recent news of a minor collision between a vehicle and a student. We strongly object to the change of use and the loss of a much-needed community space in this area, given there are no pubs within a close distance. We object to a proposal for more student housing in an already saturated area. We object to a poor design in a conservation area and to the potential for increased traffic volumes, parking pressures and general road safety. Thank you.
Thank you. The next is Nigel Morris. Back to Nigel.
Saying that not discriminates against people unable to walk more than 800 metres, which is...
Could you just hold the microphone a bit closer?
Yeah, okay. Closing the pub discriminates against people unable to walk 800 metres because of the DM6. It's above the DM6 limit to the nearest alternatives. The developer doesn't appear to have any interest in the community and just seeks to make profit by removing a community facility in contravention to DM5. The consultation was done with a very small group of people. I calculated it was only 4% of the neighbours. The neighbourhood has had many issues with the application, including fly tipping, parking issues, high number of HMOs and student accommodation. The parking survey deliberately timed at the time of the year to make it seem more favourable. The old Tavern's location, without any adjoining neighbours, would make it ideal for the diminishing number of live music venues, which it was once, and it could be viable again because of the increasing number of residents nearby.
Thank you. Thanks for that statement. And finally, Michael Orr, on behalf of Ben Larkham.
Is this on? Yeah, thank you. Blackberry Hill in 2000, and with it led to a decline in trade and investment for the nearby Old Tavern. By the time the Old Tavern shut down in 2018, it was in a very poor state of repair. The national pub chain that owned it decided after COVID to put it on the market, and it was sold in November 22 to the applicants. They submitted an application in July 23, and with that was a costed schedule of repairs by a chartered building surveyor demonstrating circa £1.3 million was needed to bring it back into a pub. The pub would be worth less than the investment. It wasn't viable. That's why the application came in. The conservation officers viewed the application and concluded no harm, but the planning officer has applied policy tests, assuming there is harm. So the report is factually flawed and legally flawed. The local planning authority required by statute, section 66 and 72 of the Listed Buildings and Conservation Area Act, to look after heritage assets. Yet somehow DM6 is weighed higher than the heritage assets in
Okay,
existence.
you've had
There's no future.
You've had 1 minute. Thank you very much for your statement. Okay, that concludes the public item. I think we'll go straight to the officer presentation. That's okay.
Good evening, everybody. Okay, so there's two applications being brought to committee, the full planning application and the associated listed building application. I'll just move on. This is the site. This is the Old Tavern here. You've got Blackberry Hill to the north of the site and Small Lane to the south of the site. The building is Grade 2 listed. It's within the Eastville ward and it is in the Stapleton and Frome Valley Conservation Area. There's also an Article 4 direction. It's in a residential area and it's in close proximity to UWE's Glenside campus. So here's some existing site photos. These were actually taken at the end of September, so they're quite recent photos. It does show that the public house is in a poor condition. That is a result of it being vacant since 2018. That being said, no marketing has been provided with this application. So even if there's sort of reference or discussions about marketing, no marketing has been submitted with this application. Here's some proposed key views. So I just want to talk about the application itself. The proposal is for the change of use of the public house, so the conversion of the public house and the construction of a 2-storey block, which you can see here, to accommodate 33 student bed spaces. It is... Yes, sorry. So 5 of those bed spaces would be within the old brewery and extension, 12 within the old tavern, and 16 within the new block that I've just shown you here. That would be purpose-built student accommodation. I've got some more proposed key views here as well. So that's an aerial at the top. And this again is the new 2-storey block. So the application is being brought to committee because we've had a councillor referral. We've also had a number of objections. Across the 2 applications, there have been 47 objections, but since the time of writing the committee report, 2 further objections were received. There are objections from amenity groups, as listed there, and the councillor referral concerns related to student concentration, number of HMOs in the area, and transport and movement concerns. The secondary to that, the loss of the public house, was another large concern raised by residents, and then there were some other concerns raised that are addressed within the committee report. But this application, and for the purposes of this presentation, I'll focus in on student concentration, number of HMOs which are linked, the transport and movement issues, as well as the loss of the public house. Okay, so here's the proposed site plan. You've got refuse and recycling here, cycle storage here, visitor cycle parking, and following quite a few revisions, Transport Development Management have confirmed that they have no objections to the application, that the scheme is policy compliant. This is on receipt of these 3 parking spaces that have been confirmed to be used by the students themselves, and there would be, were permission forthcoming, a condition to sort of a management plan condition to sort of control that. In terms of the parking survey, it showed there was insufficient capacity to accommodate demand, so TDM requested those 3 spaces that were provided. And it would be governed by a management plan. The parking survey was undertaken in full accordance with the standard methodology for assessing demand arising from new residential accommodation. The proposed highway works will encourage safe pedestrian crossings in the vicinity of the site and will mitigate existing minor highway safety issues on Blackberry Hill. So just to clarify, the 3 crossing points are here, here, and here as well. Okay, so student concentrations. It's clear that there are a number of students within this locality. Officers recognise that and agree that there are a number of students. It's over in excess of 10%. So when we're looking at the acceptability in terms of student concentrations, we can look at the number of HMOs and purpose-built student accommodation together within a 100-metre radius of the site, and then we look at the number of bed spaces to see if that is in excess of 10%, and in this instance it is in excess of 10%. So given that, we then need to apply 2 different tests, and those 2 different tests are policy DM2 and policy BCS18, I think, but I've gone on to it here. Yeah, here we go. So I'll just take you through point by point so that it's completely clear, because it is quite tricky. So levels of activity that cause excessive noise and disturbance to residents. Well, we've had comments from pollution control and they raised no objections. Also notable is that as a public house, which had karaoke and late opening hours, a compatible residential use is likely not going to cause any sort of, it's probably a more compatible use than the actual public house itself. So there's no concerns there. On-street parking we've already covered and is acceptable to Transport Development Management, as is the refuse and recycling arrangement, which would also be conditioned were permission forthcoming. In terms of the cumulative detrimental impact of physical alterations to the building, the Conservation Officer has raised no objections, and so that, and you know, we are happy to see what we think is an acceptable design proposed there. So it passes there, and then it moves to reducing the choice of homes in the area by changing the housing mix. Well, it doesn't do that because it's resulting in the loss of a public house. You're not losing any alternative residential use. In terms of BCS 18, the agent has supplied information to demonstrate that there is a need for student spaces, so there is that demand for student accommodation within the area. And given that, it actually is compatible with BCS 18 in responding to the requirements of a changing population. So that's fully in accordance with BCS 18. So therefore, in terms of the student concentrations, whilst we recognise that they are high, we find that it is policy compliant. So, on to the loss of the public house assessment. There's two limbs to DM6. This, for the purposes of this application, as I've set out already, Part I isn't applicable because no marketing has been provided with this application. So it is not being demonstrated that the pub is not viable. The pub could be viable, we don't know, because we haven't had any meaningful marketing to be able to assess that fact. In terms of criteria II, you're looking at a diverse range of public house provision existing within the locality. So I've then looked at the practice note, which was published in 2022, because that really goes into detail as to what does a diverse range of public house provision mean and what does within the locality mean. And here it says, for the purposes of this policy, a walking distance of 800 metres, roughly equivalent to 10-minute walking, should be used when mapping alternate provision. Now, in this instance, there is not a single public house within 800 metres of the application site, and therefore officers find that this wouldn't comply with policy DM6. In terms of the 10-minute walking distance, the agent has supplied a isochrone map, so it gets a little bit more complicated. In terms of if you were to use Google mapping systems, it would say that both of the public houses, the Fishponds Tap and the Golden Lion, which are shown within this border here, are within a 10-minute walking isochrone, but with Google Map, it would say it's in excess of 10 minutes. What's interesting is that isochrone considers gradients and it also considers footpaths. So it is, we have kind of accepted looking at this isochrone for the purposes of these two public houses to see if that is adequate in addressing our concerns. But ultimately, I think as you can see, both of them are beyond 800 metres. They are both only using isochrone right at the edge. If we were to accept isochrone, which we are kind of open to doing so, they are within the border of the site. We do find that those two public houses offer characteristics that the old tavern had. So the Fishponds Tap has an outdoor space, a function room, it's family friendly, serves food late opening hours, and the Golden Lion is quite a different pub, but it has darts, which I understand the old tavern had as well. So in terms of those characteristics, they do cater for the old tavern, but in terms of within the locality, we just do not find it complies with policy DM6. In addition to that, you have BCS 12. So I think this is quite an important paragraph, so I'll just read it out. It says, it seeks to retain existing community facilities, including local pubs, that help to promote better personal contact between groups and individuals and generate community spirit and a sense of place, recognising that such community facilities can help to reduce levels of social exclusion and improve health and well-being. What's really important is that it says community facilities should be accessible to all members of the community. So we've actually got two pubs that are not only over the 800 metres, but that's going to be particularly detrimental for those with limited mobility. So for that reason, we're recommending refusal of the full planning application. That being said, the listed building application, which runs along the full planning application, when looking at just the changes to the listed building, officers have spoken to the conservation officer this week to just get further clarity on the final position, which is that there is no harm caused at all. So there's a tricky test within the NPPF which says where there is less than substantial harm, I think it's paragraph 208, then you need to weigh in the benefits of the proposal, which include securing the building's optimum viable use. But in this instance, the clarity that we received confirms that there is not less than substantial harm, there is no harm. So that does not apply. So officers are actually seeking amendment to the refusal reason of the full planning application that relates to the optimum viable use, and this is how that would look. So I'll just give you a chance to see that. So it's very much consistent, but it would omit the line about optimum viable use, and in turn also the listed building application. We would be supportive of that because it doesn't actually affect the use. We have no issues with the works proposed to the listed building. The conservation officer has confirmed there is no harm. So I've just set out our sort of positions on our recommendations in terms of what the officer recommendation is right there at the end, and that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thanks. I think we might need a bit more clarity. I'm not entirely sure I know exactly what that meant. Richard, you've got your hand up. Do you want to start?
The officers has put in a report, so I thank you for trying to clear the mud somewhat. But a reference has been made to the likely relocation of certain UWE facilities away. Weight, if any, should members give to this?
I would say limited to none, because at this point there's no confirmations of when/if that would actually happen. But I have in the committee report as well.
Thanks. Any other questions? Zoe?
So firstly, I just want to say that the actual proposed development I think is beautiful. I think it's lovely. Just think, I think it's a little rich to still have the sign Old Tavern when it's no longer a tavern. B, why couldn't that actual bit, the building with the Old Tavern, remain a tavern? And C, why student accommodation? Why couldn't it just be flats?
I think it's quite tricky because officers have a duty to assess kind of the application as it's presented to us. And in terms of architecturally, I think there are some nods to the former public house change of use. And that was something that the conservation officer was quite pleased to see. So, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, do you want to come back on that, Zoe? Do you understand what, you get that, don't you?
Bring it back to the...
Okay, yeah. Fine. Anyone else got any clarifications they want to go for it?
I just wanted to know, I know that Blackberry Hill, because I have to sometimes to get to the train station, and on the pictures it shows a lovely wide road with bicycles going up and down, and Blackberry Hill is an incredibly busy road with massive big buses going up and down, and the thing that always gets me, because I know it's a grade 2 listed building, is that the road completely narrows there and the tavern's corner is almost on the road, and I'm wondering, how's they allowed to have people that live there right on the road where double-decker buses are thundering through? I don't know if that's allowed or not allowed, if that's a material consideration. Even if they are students, and people don't seem to like students, I don't know why.
I would say that we kind of consult pollution control, but also air quality, and they just raised no objections. So in terms of the actual living accommodation provided for the students, they supplied a daylight and sunlight assessment, and it confirms that they all receive adequate natural light, and whilst there's no space standard requirement for students, it's comparable to other sort of gross internal areas of student accommodation in the area. There's also the central courtyard, so for that reason we find the livability for students acceptable.
Any other questions from anyone? Guy, go for it.
Sorry, obviously we're all running to catch up with the change in the record, which is fine. And I was going to ask, actually, would it be possible, so normal practice would be that we'd have the officers' presentations emailed to us. I haven't received that. I don't know if anyone else has. If that could be done, it would be massively helpful.
I think as you're subbing, you might have been excluded from that by mistake.
Oh, but that has happened. Apologies.
That'd be what it is.
Super
Sorry
helpful.
about that, Guy.
But I did just want to sort of explore a little, if it's at all possible, how strong the officer feels the reasons for refusal are, given the change to what's been recommended to us. And I'm thinking particularly, I don't feel the need to get into this if we don't need to, but I have to admit, I quite strongly disagree with some of the thinking around the way the overconcentration of student housing tests have been applied. We may not need to go into it now, in that the other reasons for refusal may be absolutely strong enough. But I would be very interested in the officer's take.
In terms of transport and movement, we actually consulted to see if they found there were any other grounds for refusal, and they said it's wholly compliant, so we wouldn't want to add any grounds for refusal there. In terms of student concentration, BCS 18 and DM2, it complies. We do acknowledge that there is a high concentration of students, and that is, it kind of only says it's a section of the HMO SPD, so it's a supplementary planning document, so it doesn't hold the weight that policy holds. But it does set out, I think it's under section 4.4, where you look at purpose-built student accommodation with the number of HMOs, just to consider that, and then it is looking at it against the policy. So in terms of the policies, I also find that to be wholly policy compliant. For officers, the only concern with this application is DM6. We feel like this to approve the full planning application would undermine that policy specifically, but that also policy runs hand in hand with BCS 12.
Okay. Can I ask a couple of questions? Well, the first one was actually the one that Richard's already asked, which is about UE Bristol's future plans for the Glenside campus. It seems like that's been answered, that we can't take that into account. It's got little to no weight. That's fine. The second question was, it seems to be quite important to just nail down this distance to the alternative pubs, and it seems a bit subjective. It may not be. It may be objective. You may feel like that is okay. Can you just again kind of go through why you feel that these are too far away from the site to make them sort of options for people who are, that are close enough to the site now? Do you see what I mean?
Okay, so again, it really comes down to DM6 and the supporting practice note, which says, for the purposes of this policy, a walking distance of 800 metres. So if you look at that alone, because it then kind of says, I think, secondary to that, which is still relevant, and we have looked at the two pubs within the 10-minute walking isochrone, which was provided, but it does kind of, this is a quote, so word for word, you would take the 800 metres first, in my view, the way this reads, and we have no public houses. So to then argue that there is a diverse range of public house provision, it doesn't seem to stand up with that policy. In terms of the isochrone, we haven't really looked at this at committee before, not to my knowledge anyway. We've heard that it has been used on travel plans, so it's something that we're willing to look at. But also, it says this is this sort of perimeter shows a 10-minute walking distance line, if you like, but there's not much more detail, which I've set out in my committee report, as to, is this really 10 minutes? Is this 10 minutes and 59 seconds? Is it 10 minutes and 30 seconds? Is it 9 minutes, 30 rounds? That detail is missing. And yeah, for those reasons, we just feel like it doesn't comply. But certainly, I find with BCS 12, it does clearly say that these community facilities, of which that includes local pubs, should be accessible to all members of the community, and I also feel like it does fail there.
Thank you, that's helpful. So you had your hand up, Zoe, yeah? And then Serena, yeah. Okay, first.
So I understood you right up until the point after you said the reasons for refusal. Then you're like, but it's 2 applications, and then you just went on the spiel that you probably know your stuff, but I didn't understand a word of it. Is it possible you could just tell us to that, but again in layman terms, like pretend I'm a 5-year-old, okay?
Sorry, it's my nerves. Okay, so there's 2 separate applications, the full planning application. So as part of our assessment of a full planning application, we're looking at transport and movement issues, sustainability, every whole picture. And when we're looking at the whole picture, we find it fails on DM6. So that's the use. So the use of the public house, we're saying it can't be supported. So we recommend the refusal of the full planning application. The listed building application, they could carry out those works without the full planning application. So they could make changes internally to the building. They can demolish outcrops, I think is probably the best way to describe. Parts of the buildings have been demolished. And that is what the listed building application is looking at. And the Conservation Officer has confirmed that he finds there is no harm, not less than substantial harm, but just no harm from those works. So that's because the outcrop elements, there are reasons behind that too, because the outcrop elements could be modern additions and things like that.
So the outcrop parts, just to confirm again, I'm very sorry. So that's like potentially not sheds, but like things like that that are easy to deconstruct, and that's why it's not harm. It's not like big walls or anything.
It's not harm because they don't contribute to what makes the building special in terms of its listing. Okay. So they're not demolished. They're not loose. There's no harm in terms of fabric.
And how is it decided what is special and what is not?
So generally what is special, well, this is coming from me, I don't know, is kind of what's original. Within a listing description, it tells you what makes the building special and why it's listed. So they're not parts that are of significance. So therefore, their removal doesn't harm the listed building itself. I hope that's clear enough.
You've done really well, thank you.
Okay, Serena was next.
I must admit, I'm confessing something as well that I have not, didn't understand the term isochrone, right? I'm just wanting to know, though, those routes to these pubs that they say are accessible, are they really accessible routes? I mean, are they quirky footpaths? Would they be accessible to people with mobility issues? I'm just wondering how those routes compare to what you might see on a Google map.
I think it's a really good point, and actually that's where it's lacking detail, as I said about the 10 minutes, is it 10, is it 9 minutes? So that is all kind of feeding into our overall decision that there's not adequate, genuine alternative provision, which I think is what it's set out in the DM6 practice note.
And I suppose you also got to take into account security and crime. They don't want to encourage people to be walking down back alleys at night for the pub. Else, I suppose.
Okay, any other questions, or should we move on to the quick one, guy? Go on.
I just wanted to flag these issues around policy DM2 again and the impact on the amenity. I just want to check that the data in terms of the HMOs that were reviewed was based on the pinpoint system. Is that right? Was it solely based on the pinpoint system?
Yes.
The reason I raised...
elaborate slightly. It's so I think it's 11.54% combined number of bed spaces from 8 student bed spaces from HMOs and purpose-built student accommodation, which is over the 10. So that's where we acknowledge that student concentrations are high in the area. But also we do need to recognise with HMOs, although the likelihood is that the majority of those HMOs will be occupied by student, we don't actually know if that is the case for every single HMO. So again, those figures aren't necessarily definitive.
The reason I ask, and this may be one for Johnny to... I'm thinking specifically of the Oak Road appeal from a few months ago, where we had a situation where Pinpoint was used to assess the number of HMOs and student bed spaces in an area. The inspector's report said, no, you also have to take into account the number of planning consents as well. Now, that obviously would include Glenside campus, and even though, again, not that relevant today, Glenside campus is closing, those planning consents would still be there. Everything that is either licensed or has planning consent for use as an HMO should be taken into account in that assessment when assessing the impact of the additional bed spaces on residential amenity at a cap level of 10% in the SPD. Now, obviously, we're talking about purpose-built rather than HMO, but the impact is still the same on residential amenity. That's the reason I apologies, really hammering down on this. I just want to make sure that that's the test that we're applying in this case.
Yeah, so if I can just try and provide sort of some on that. So yeah, the sort of calculator that we have is based on the Pinpoint data, which is updated kind of roughly sort of quarterly. And so, yeah, the figure that's been quoted by the case officer, would have been based on that sort of standard calculation, which kind of links back to the SPD and kind of the methodology that's in there.
I think just the last one.
Last time, I promise, but that was the inspector's decision in the Oak Road case, was the officer's methodology being used was not compatible with the policy. It had to be all of the licenses, which is all that appears on Pinpoint, and all of the consents in the area as well. And obviously there'd be overlap. One would hope that the HMOs are licensed as well as having planning consent. But I just want to check that in this case, I'm not even going to bring up the problem with renewals on Pinpoint as well, but do you know what I mean? It could be a substantial underestimate. I just want to check.
Yeah, so the point data takes into account the licenses and also planning permissions. I mean, I don't have the decision here on Oak Road, but my recollection there as well was there was another issue of that data just being out of step with the situation on the ground and kind of the reports that we were hearing sort of from neighbours as well. So hence why, I mentioned the sort of roughly sort of quarterly basis that's updated.
Okay. One quick question. Yeah, go on.
It's just a quick question that you use Pinpoint in the data of all these things as council tax. Is it not a way of finding out how many students live in the area by the council tax? Because you have to say why you don't pay council tax.
It's not used. I don't think council tax is used, is it?
No, I know it's not a material, but if you're going to try and work out how many students there are in the area, that's what I'm saying. Then
I think we're getting into
how many council tax.
We're getting into a moment of trying to form policy in a which might not to be a policy that we can put in right now. Anything else for questioning? And then we might go on to the debate. Okay, so let's go on to the debate. Okay, Zoe, Richard, then Guy.
I think it is stunning. I think when I lived in Fish Ponds as a student, I would have gladly lived there. But I'm really disappointed to see that there is no retention of the actual pub. I don't see why it couldn't have even been the pub and student accommodation. But I'm also now aware that Glenside is closing, so maybe there won't even be the need for student accommodation here. And the traffic congestion is a big concern. And the HMOs, there just seems to be a lot of things here that part of me really wants it because it's really pretty, but just there's so many things that are stacking up that I don't think it's necessarily best for the area, and so I personally just won't be voting for this.
Okay, I forgot who was next. Was it Richard? Yeah, sorry.
I don't know what the Portney such as I am, that we seem to be again coming from the same direction, guys. Scary, isn't it? I must be getting dangerously left-wing in my life. Members will know that I have a very high regard for the grounds for any determination, particularly refusal, which comes to committee and seeks our approval. And that's particularly because, in my view, it needs to actually maximise the grounds for actually sustainable upholding. If it's likely to be overturned and refused and possibly costs awarded against us, in my view, we shouldn't go near that. And it's unwise to do so. I have to say, I am persuaded about pinpoint the over 10% harm on the local community by student over concentration, and I would support that as a ground. I don't believe that this somewhat watered down, nuanced justification on the public house grounds would be a sustainable appeal. As Michael has said, there are major viability grounds for pubs, and that's even before the present Labour government swinging a tax upon them over things like minimum pricing. So I have to say, if the committee is minded to support this refusal, because it won't be on the grounds that I favour on over student concentration, which I believe is defendable, can be defendable. It's on public house grounds, which I don't believe. I'll be abstaining. Now, that's only the second time I've ever abstained in my life. I've always voted for or voted against, but I don't believe it's sustainable, it's defendable at appeal.
Thank you, Richard. Guy, you had him next, didn't you? And then George after that. And then Kyle.
Thanks, Chair. So first things first, I really want to congratulate the officer on this. This is one of the most complex lines of reasoning I've ever seen. It's a phenomenally complicated site and a phenomenally complicated case. It is hard to follow, but it's hard to follow because it's really bloody complicated. And I think a really good job has been done of communicating the actual through line of thinking here. Similarly to Councillor Reddy, I would feel more comfortable if there were stronger reasons for refusal alongside. It does strike me as one of those cases where there are multiple reasons for refusal. And it really does stand in, obviously not a material consideration, stands in stark contrast to the case we heard earlier this evening in terms of the responsiveness of an applicant to community consultation and involvement. At the moment, I'm minded to go with the officer's recommendation, but if anyone wanted to suggest any way that I could get behind of strengthening that reason for refusal, I would happily go with it. And I do feel the need to just push back on a couple of the sentiments I've heard this evening, not just because there are students I know in the public gallery this evening. I'd say this as a ward councillor for Cotton, which has arguably more students than anywhere other than Central, make massive contributions to the area, both in terms of the culture, the viability of local businesses, and frankly, the sort of vivacity of the neighbourhood. I'm a big fan of students, and 9 times out of 10, I'd go as far as say 99 times out of 100, when there are problems with harmful concentrations, it comes because of the conduct of usually landlords rather than students. And I really think that needs to be borne in mind when we talk about these cases. That said, I am genuinely a little bit worried about over-concentration in this case as well. And as I say, if there was a way of adding that in a way that was safe and didn't risk greater costs at appeal, needlessly, I'd be happy to take it. But as is, minded to go with the officer's recommendation. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I think it was George next, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm... So, walking to a pub for me is difficult. I have cerebral palsy, and I think with the DM6, was it? The wording of that implies to me that would be grounds for refusal, because I don't think I would be able to walk that far in such a short amount of time. And, that might take me 15, 20 minutes. And I think that is something which is just weighing very heavily on my mind right now. So I'm still going to consider this. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Was there someone over here? Cartier wanted to say something.
I'm, again, also grounds for refusal. I have no students either. And, however, the over-concentration, that is a very family-led area. Also, that pub is very close to a main walkway from Oldbury Court down to the Eastern Parks, the whole park area. So that's quite a nice way to get to the pub there. As I said, all the reasons you've given for a pub in the area, and that's not close enough to people to walk. The whole area there is quite hilly and bumpy, and it's not a smooth, nice walk from there to Fishponds Road. And I'm still really confused as to how you can allow residential areas on that one bit of pub over there, bit of building over there, which almost is right on top of the road. In fact, the road narrows to try and fit the pub in, and I've always thought about it and thought, well, you can't tear it down because it's a Grade 2 listed building. And there's huge buses going there, and I don't think that's a suitable place for a residential area, I'm sorry. But I know that that's not a reason for refusal, but I'll go with the reasons for the refusal that you have as the officer has.
Okay, Sarah, and then Serena.
Thank you. Similarly to other people, I do disagree with a lot of the sentiments when these come through, that students, all they bring to the area is noise and rubbish. And actually, I come across students in council life in many different areas. They contribute a lot to our city, and a lot of them stay in the city. We have a high retention rate because of the good experience that they have in Bristol, and they become residents. There's probably some councillors on our benches who, there we go, started off as students, stayed for the long term. But that being said, this is not the right development for this land. The loss of the pub, there is a difference between a pub is sadly closed because of the economic circumstances, and there's been work into the viability, and it's been seen that that pub won't survive, or there isn't that viability. We haven't been convinced of that, and we haven't been convinced that there is adequate facilities in the community that makes up for the loss of the pub. And I don't know the area as well. It's not an area of Bristol that I'm as familiar with, so I'm defaulting to Katya's knowledge of the roads, but clearly there's some unsuitability with that residential area, and it creating conflict with the roads and with the thing. So with that in mind, I think I'll be minded to vote against the recommendation, not the recommendations, the proposed, vote against the plan.
I get what you mean, yeah. Okay, Serena.
I think, ironically, it's because it's an area that is vibrant and has students, and as a growing population, it's pubs. So we need to protect the community facilities, which is what DM6 is precisely trying to do. That's its purpose. I think that's a very strong argument. Otherwise, what is it? It just becomes a dormitory. So we need to protect the pubs. One of the groups mentioned, I think it was Living Eastern Heritage Environment Group, that several other pubs have closed recently. There's no reason, as we can see, there's no evidence to suggest this isn't a viable pub. And I think we should retain it the best we can, because we're losing pubs head over heels at the moment, aren't we? So to my mind, I can see that there's some concern about the refusal not being strong enough for appeal. I too would feel reassured to say if we could use the argument on the population imbalance, if that could be looked into, but otherwise I'm happy to go with the officer's recommendation for refusal.
I'd like to say that the 10% limit is there for a reason, then I think that, and I think that's an and I think that an abundance of like HMOs has a large impact on the local community in terms of transport, in terms of accessibility. I think it's actually disabled, and as a disabled person myself, I have to stand with disabled people. So yeah, I don't think it's right. I'd also like to say that the pub is a huge community asset, and I know for sure that there is a developer out there who will restore that pub into its old grand state, and I don't think it's smart to add on to the already huge amount of like HMOs in the local area. And I also don't like that the public consultation was quite limited in regards to how many people actually turned it up and actually had the consultation applied to them. And I also agree with Katya's point about that street being way too thin, and I just think it's a public safety hazard to snap down student accommodations there. So for those reasons, I won't be voting for this proposal. Thank you.
And was there anyone speaking in a debate? I'm going to say some things. I've not actually got, people have brought in something that we can't really consider, which is UE's plans for the area, which does influence my thinking, to be honest, but it isn't a material consideration, so I'll discount that. I don't have necessarily problems with student accommodation in this location. It is kind of right next to the campus, and it's only 33 beds. It's not, for me, it's not actually that. I wouldn't be sure, especially as you said, that it's policy compliant. I think there are question marks about that. But I do feel that this is just a less pronounced version of the giant Goram application we took last time. I think that, if you look at your local context, which I did, and obviously if you look at your local area and you discount all the pubs within 800 metres, ask yourself whether you'd be okay with that. Ask yourself whether you'd be okay with the nearest pub being further than 800 metres, and no one who likes going to the pub is going to say yes to that. And I think that the DM6 does provide really, really good protection for pubs that are in more isolated locations like this one is. I would argue that we should stick with the refusal reason that we've been given in the officer recommendation, and not perhaps complicate it at this point. I don't know what others think about that, but I'm willing to hear other views. I am keen for the listed building consent to come back to committee if it can. If that's an option for us, because just because of the complication of it coming quite last second, I think it's just useful to us if we've had sight of it in this committee. It's just useful to just round that off in the committee. So that's what I think I'll propose, if that's okay. But I'll come to that in a second, of course. So I think we'll deal with the full application first. So I propose I move that we accept the officer recommendation and refuse the full planning application. Oh, yeah.
Seconded.
Seconded. Quickly in there, Zoe, as our seconder. So we'll just go around, and if you're in favour of that proposal to refuse, so yeah, okay. So I'll actually just start here, and then I'll be the last person.
Abstain.
Refuse.
Refuse.
For?
Yeah. Sorry. You need to say whether you're in favour of that motion. So should we just come back to George and Serena? Sorry, just do that formally.
Refusal of the full application.
Yeah, so that's 4. You're in favour of the motion.
For the. Sorry, yeah, no, 4, yeah.
I know it's confusing. Go on.
4.
4.
4.
4.
4.
4.
And I'm also 4, so I think that's unanimous.
One abstention, Chair.
Oh, sorry, there was Richard was abstaining, sorry.
Ayes and nays.
Yeah.
Okay, so, yeah, we could do ayes and nays, that's true. The second thing is to decide how we're going to deal with the listed building application. I would propose that we take that as something that comes back to the committee, so we defer it basically to the next committee meeting. Is there a seconder for that?
Seconder, yeah.
Seconded, thank you, Zoe. Very quick today, good. Sorry, you got your hand up, Guy, go on.
If I may, Chair, just because that proposal is also new to us, just in case the officers wish to reflect on any risks or anything that they feel might be inherent in the
is there
course of
anything
action,
you need to...
is there anything you feel we should be aware of?
No, I mean, I think in our view, the listed building consent, because we will be considering that under the Listed Building and Conservation Areas Act, it is really a separate assessment that relate to the works to the listed building. So I don't think, in terms of our immediate thoughts, there are risks we can think of in terms of this approach.
Okay, so that's been moved and seconded. So we'll just go around and say if you're in favour of that.
Four.
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 4.
4.
4.
4.
4.
4.
And 4. Okay, so we have a clear understanding of where we've gone with that.
Unanimous for
hopefully.
deferral, yeah.
Thank you very much, everyone. We'll have another 5-minute break. Yeah, and thank you, everyone, in the public gallery for coming for that item. We'll come back at 8:30 on the dot, okay? Restarted. Where are we here? Let's have a look. Agenda item 9C, which is the giant Goram. So, to clarify again, we did hear this application at the last DCA committee, and it was deferred to this committee so that officers could come up with refusal reasons, which have been provided now. So we're just going to take the public forum for this first. Thank you so much for persevering and being here still. I appreciate that's a long time to wait. So the first statement is from Mary Page. Remember, you've got 1 minute. It's from Mary Page, who is nominated to speak on behalf of John Mackenzie. Is Mary here? I know she is. I just talked to her.
John Mackenzie is a near neighbour of the giant Goram. It has felt as though the decision to demolish the site had already been made when he witnessed the complete rear section of the copper roof of the pub being removed by contractors in February this year. The police attended and engaged with the contractors, leaving satisfied that they had been instructed by the owners. Since then, the roof has been exposed. The weather's damaged the pub, and it's substantially different to how the application shows it. The proposed micro-pub space would struggle to accommodate the occupants of the new homes that are built, let alone many more of the population in the surrounding neighbourhood. And he says that it's a large space that was once a viable business supported by the local community. Since it was built, the community has grown and diversified and is due to expand significantly with large-scale housing developments close by.
Okay. Thanks for your minute. Thanks for that statement. Next statement, Spalding, if Norman's there.
Yeah, the proposed micropub on the giant Goram site is not an adequate substitute for several reasons. Location, most of the micropubs in the Bristol area are on established high streets with shops nearby, next door in fact, either side, high footfall and frequent bus services to several destinations. The micro Goram is in a deprived area with no shops nearby and limited bus services. Size and viability grounds. The extremely small size of the proposed micropub makes it hard to see how it could survive financially. The draft budget in the revised viability report suggests one-person operation, which would in turn mean limited opening hours and probably not 7-day-a-week opening. The revised viability report describes a style of operation with craft ales and the value of the drinks would be higher. This assumes a clientele willing to pay higher prices, but the pub will still be in a deprived area with many older and disabled residents. The absence of a kitchen means that there would be few opportunities to generate extra income. We've taken advice from the owner of 4 Counties Inns, an experienced pub operator with existing operations in Bristol, who's made at least 2 offers to buy the giant Goram. His opinion is that such a small micropub would not be viable and it would have to be larger.
Thank you for your statement. Move on to a statement from Tim Belston. He doesn't want to say anything. Okay, that's fine. The next statement is from Chris Faulkner Gibson. Is Chris here?
Thank you, Chair. It's extremely disappointed that the case officer is still trying to recommend approval of this application. I've made a number of points in the statement. We've made detailed objections over the years that this has been bouncing around. So quite simply, a micropub will not meet the needs of the local community, but a community-owned and operated full-size pub run on the Plunkett Foundation's more than a pub model most certainly will. We are concerned, it's already been confirmed, that as a new venture, the micropub would not be protected by the agent of change principle, and therefore the licence will be vulnerable to challenge and withdrawal. This proposal is objected to strongly by the local community group Ambition Lawrence Weston, by Ward Councillor Blenkinsop, the Save the Giant Goram campaign and the Lawrence Weston Neighbourhood Planning Group. All of these are local people who know the area, who know what will work. You have a properly convened planning forum. All these people who give their time to try to work for the interests of their local community. Please listen to them if you don't want to listen to camera and refuse this application.
Thanks for your statement. Let's go on to the next statement from Mark Pepper. Mark here.
Good evening. On behalf of Lawrence Western Planning Forum, we would like to state our objection to the application. The loss of any opportunity to provide a much needed community social space large enough to ensure financial sustainability and community benefit. We do appreciate past committee comments concerning this application where the 8 houses proposed was seen as a positive. We would like to politely remind the committee that Lawrence Western Planning Forum has proactively supported many housing developments over the past 5 years, and now as a result the area will see over 400 plus new homes being built, with other sites allocated for housing and currently being considered and plans worked up with the community and Bristol City Council. The community agreed suitable housing sites in Lawrence Western. The considerations made whilst writing the neighbourhood development plan. The Giant Goram site was not allocated for housing. With the additional 400 houses coming to the area, the need for social infrastructure, especially at the Giant Goram end of the estate, is very much needed. The main driver behind delivering a neighbourhood development plan was to ensure we create a well-balanced, cohesive community. To ensure this, social amenities are of paramount importance. And just to say, I quite like students as well.
Thank you, Mark. Next, Sergeant, is Joe here?
Hello. Right. Yeah, so we're here again, and I see that there's still no case against the viability of a full-size pub. And this is something that the planning inspector ruled on in 2021, so I don't really know why we're here again. The opportunity to create a community pub hasn't happened because of the planning applications that have been in front of committees for the last 3 or 4 years. So we haven't been able to demonstrate a potential viability because we haven't actually been able to try it out. Also, the micro pub, it's not a pub. Simply, it is not a pub. It doesn't have the same protections under planning, so it's far more vulnerable to, going. And I think we've already seen today, this is the 3rd application in front of you that involves a pub. They are still relevant today, and if we don't stand up for them and protect them, we're going to be back here time and time again. We're just going to keep losing pubs. Thanks.
Thank you for your statement. The next statement is Roger Sabido.
We know the situation in the Lawrence Western Estate. We've rehearsed it before here, and our efforts to regenerate. A welcome big increase in new housing, but a dire scarcity of amenity. The last pub of 5 left on the estate, the last real chance to answer the residents' repeatedly expressed wishes for a broad range of facilities. The community has a strong record of organising and fundraising, but the threat of redevelopment stops the large social enterprise funders from committing. Removal of the threat by a firm refusal after suffering 5 years of obdurate, destructive stonewalling gives us the chance to go out and see what can be done. You'll have seen the Plunkett model set out in some detail. We know there are options out there, certainly more than had previously been offered. A solution is close. Support us and our neighbourhood planning forum with the support of the major funders, our community and the wider community of Bristol beyond, from the Sheffield's Gardener's Rest to the White Horse in Oxford, the Star in Greenwich to the Bevy in Brighton and the Bell in Bath. Many more examples of community enterprise. What the residents really want and need, our vision, the Giant Goram, much, much more than a pub.
Thank you. Thank you for your statement. Statement is from Mary Page.
Since the last meeting, I actually met with the Mr. Nicholas, looking to buy the site from Hawkfield Homes. I did this with the agreement of the Save the Giant Goram group, and we arranged a meeting at the Lawrence Western Planning Group at Ambition Lawrence Western. It is to be thoroughly welcomed that Mr. Bracey was willing to do this. The change to the micropub plans and addition of outside space was equally appreciated, as was his willingness in good faith to consider other options should the plan go through. However, it's felt that the change still does not go far enough at this stage to meet the full needs of the community. Any approval of the plan as it stands put the Giant Goram Group at risk of having to pay a new and revised land value after the sale and demolition of any property, with no guarantee of being able to purchase the parcel of land with the micropub. We really do thank Mr Bracey for his time and efforts and believe there could even be a compromise found in the future given enough time, but we have to support the Giant Goram position for refusal of the planning application.
Thank you for that statement. The next one is Nigel. Is Nigel here? Yeah.
Yeah, it appears that the developers only bought the pub to it from its housing. To achieve this, it appears that they seem to have allowed it to become deliberately deteriorated and should not be rewarded by giving any planning permission being granted, as this sets a dangerous precedent to encourage other developers to do the same with other pubs. They don't seem to have any interest in running it as a pub or a micro-pub, and only resubmitted the application with a micro-pub to try and get it through the planning committee. There is a risk that a micro-pub may not even open. Adjoining properties can complain about the noise and the future, and is of very poor viability. In the application, if the application is approved, the community will lose a valuable community asset that cannot be satisfied by a micro-pub. Although the owners state the larger pub is inviable, they have not run it as a pub, so have not been independently verified. I believe comments stating only a micro-pub because of being successful should be ignored, as plenty of community-owned pubs are also successful. From my experience of visiting pubs and micro-pub, I believe a conventional pub would be the best option for the community.
Thank you for your statement. The next statement is from, Paul Jobson. Is Paul here? Over there.
As members of the Planning Committee, you'll understand your role is to determine the planning application in accordance with the adopted development plan. The proposal has a recommendation for approval and is considered by your professional officers to be in accordance with council policy. The proposal will deliver new housing when Bristol City Council can't illustrate a 5-year land supply. NPPF Para 11D requires the council to grant permission unless adverse impacts of doing so will significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. The proposal will deliver a micropub, which is considered a viable alternative form of public health provision. The decision today is not a choice between this proposal and the alternative suggested by objectors, but a decision on whether the proposal is policy compliant or not. I believe members should support the officer recommendation, as I believe refusal would be difficult to justify and clearly challengeable at appeal. I would therefore encourage members to determine the application in front of them with their heads rather than perhaps their hearts.
Thank you for that statement. Nick Bracey, you're the next statement.
After the last committee meeting, we took all the comments on board what Ambition Lauren Weston said, and we tried to address all those concerns. After that, I went and met them, and one of the biggest concerns I think that came out of the meeting was they thought that I was going to run the micro-pub, then say it's not viable and put another property there. So what I did say to them is I would let them have it and run it. I gave them loads of suggestions what they should do and how they could make money. And I said they can have it for a peppercorn rent for £1 a year. And I think if they did that, it would work. And I said it is exactly what we've done with the other micro-pubs. That the more effort you put in, the better reward you get back out. Out of my own expense, from the last committee meeting, I went and got the place secured. That was inside and out. And I think it would be a shame if it doesn't get passed. That happen is more antisocial behaviour will happen, and police and resources of money.
Thanks for your statement. The next person is Vin Nguyen, but I understand they're not here or not attending. They had to leave. Is that not speaking yet? And so the final one is Councillor Tom Blenkinsop.
Thank you very much. My written statement, and I'll try to be brief. I really just want to reiterate something. Lawrence Weston is one of the most deprived areas in Bristol. It's one of the most deprived areas in the United Kingdom. It needs all the help it can get. I would like councillors to think very carefully before granting permission to remove one of its few remaining community assets. Please consider if this is the best approach for the site, for the area and the people in it. I remain unconvinced. Others have argued very eloquently to that effect. I think there are better options that remain available, and officers have given a policy-led reason for refusal in Appendix 1. I feel that reason is a solid one, and I urge members to refuse.
Thank you, Tom. That's the end of the public item, so we will move to the officer presentation. Over to you, Conrad.
Thank you, Chair. So the application is for the demolition of the giant Goram with a proposed mixed-use scheme providing 8 residential dwellings and a micropub. So the reason for the committee referral, the application was previously considered at DCA on the 4th of September. Members decided to... Sorry,
Just a technical hitch. We've got to get the presentation up on the main screen at the front here, which is... yeah, we're just doing that. Nice one, thanks.
So, just to return, it was deferred from DCA on the 4th of September. Members decided to defer the application for the following grounds. 1, viability. Members requested more information on DM6 and provision of wider community facilities and detail to be provided on viability. This would also include details of the proposed viability of the micropub. They also wanted reasons for refusal. Members asking officers to provide further clarifications about reasons for refusal if they were minded to refuse. So just to recap on the consultation responses, which were covered before, there are 28 objections and 8 letters of support received. The main concerns raised were the loss of the pub, the proposed housing, suggesting there's an over-provision of housing in the area. There were concerns that the micropub was a niche proposal and likely to be unsuccessful. There were concerns of the provision of community facilities, suggestions that other community facilities should be provided at the site. There's a lack of community engagement, concerns about viability, suggestions that the pub was deliberately run down to make it unviable, and the pub was marketed at an unrealistic price. Other suggestions were made, and instead of a micropub such as a local shop, and objections from camera suggesting that the micropub does not meet the needs of the community that a full-size pub would. So here's a site location plan. As you can see, Barrowmead Drive is the location. In Lawrence Weston, you've got the existing layout of the giant Goram and the existing elevations. And the proposal includes the north and south elevations with 8 dwellings and a micropub on the site. The proposed side elevations. We've had a revision since the previous committee with the inclusion of outdoor seating for the micropub and some canopies as well. We've got a sketch here, indicative sketch of the front elevation of the little Goram with the outdoor seating and the signage proposed, and then another indicative sketch. And we've got a 3D view from Middleton Road with the canopy in the pub and the outdoor seating, kind of indicative look of what it might look like. So in terms of viability, members have requested more detail to be provided on viability, with inclusion of details of the proposed viability of the micropub. A supplementary viability report for the micropub element was submitted by the applicant. The viability report is report-based and provides only limited financial information. It appears to focus on updating the camera viability test only. In this report, it makes comparisons of running the proposed micropub against the giant Goram. Suggestions due to the smaller scale of running the pub, that is, administrative costs would be much lower than the Giant Goram, and suggestions that gross profits would be estimated at a similar amount, therefore the forecasted profits of the micropub would be higher than running the Giant Goram. Concerns have been raised about the viability of a micropub. However, it appears that the financial predictions show reasonable profits can be made with lower risks than running the Giant Goram. However, further evidence of the viability of the Giant Goram has not been provided. Members have asked for reasons for refusal if they are minded to refuse. The officer recommendation is that the provision of the micropub provides a viable alternative to the Giant Goram and it meets the test of DM6. On this basis, officers consider that the benefits of the development outweigh the harm and therefore would be minded to recommend approval. However, if members do not consider the benefits outweigh the harm, the suggested reasons for refusal should suggest that 1, sufficient evidence has not been provided that the pub is no longer economically viable. The provision of the micropub is not considered a suitable alternative provision to the micropub. And reason 2, the benefits of the proposal do not outweigh the harm. The total demolition of existing building at the site would fail to respect the historic and social value of the building and would harm the character and local distinctiveness of the area. So on the planning balance, there are some negative impacts of the proposal. There was a loss of a public house, the last in the area, loss of the existing building. It is a non-designated heritage asset. There was conflict with the Lawrence Western Neighbourhood Development Plan, which requires community facilities should be retained unless they're replaced with services or facilities of equal or higher value. However, officers consider material considerations weigh in favour of the proposal. The pub's been vacant since 2019. The existing building is in poor condition, would require significant renovation to bring it back into use. It's considered that the policy complies with the proposal complies with policy BCS 12 DM6 and the emerging SSE 8 in the provision of a micropub on site. There's a public benefit with the provision of 8 new dwellings and the provision of a micropub to a long vacant site. There's positive B&G over 162%, and there's positive sustainability on site. So, in summary, the recommendation, the proposal would positively contribute to housing delivery in a sustainable location. It does also achieve a mix of uses, including the delivery of micropub. A smaller site proposal, one that leads to a smaller site proposal, one that does not lead to harm to heritage assets, would deliver less in the benefits with this regard. The proposal would bring a long-term vacant site back into use and would re-provide a community use of a pub in a reduced form of a micropub. Suggestions have been made by community groups to take on the former pub. However, no viable alternative proposals have been submitted since 2019. It is considered that the proposal meets the test of DM6 and BCS 12 by providing an alternative provision to the Giant Goram in the provision of a micropub. The applicant has welcomed use by community groups and improvements have been made to include outdoor seating. The recommendation would be to approve of the conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just start by reminding members that we have obviously asked questions and had a debate about this before. That's not to say we should limit and artificially what we say, but just bear that in mind, I think, as we're going through this discussion. So I had Richard and then Zoe. So.
Just to proceed your point, really, just to help us, probably best if I pose my first question to Jeremy. I'm right, aren't I, that initially we should vote on, or at least move, the officer recommendation to approve. If that falls or fails to commander, seconder, then we move to the other refusal proposal.
Yes, that's correct. Under the needs to move the approval, and if there's no seconder and or if the vote for that falls, then it's open to the committee to decide what it then wants to do, which could include moving refusal.
My second question is to Jonathan. Members were last December, the Secretary of State for Planning actually issued an order to the planning inspectorate that if they received an appeal where members of DC committees overturn officer advice, they should communicate with them and they would expect a refusal in most cases and possibly a cost to be awarded. Bearing in mind we've got option A and option B, how would that feature in that?
So a written ministerial statement that was issued at the end of last year, which covered a number of matters, but one of which was in relation to committees and essentially where committees take a different view to that of officers, which of course committees are entitled to do. However, the Secretary of State, as part of that, had asked the Planning Inspectorate to start reporting to them instances where that had happened, and then where an appeal against that refusal had gone on to be allowed. And there was really a reminder really to say that the overturning of a recommendation should be rare and infrequent. That isn't to say that it can't happen, but that was the advice that was covered by the written ministerial statement.
I think the next person was Zoe and then Serena. I think you put your hand up. No, you didn't. Okay.
Don't we have to vote on the recommendation? Isn't that what we're doing first?
We're doing questions
at
the moment still. So we're in the process of asking questions. If you've got any more questions, we'll do those first, and then we'll move on to the debate.
Great. Sure that this application, because we wanted to see more on the viability of whether the giant Goram itself could be viable in comparison to the micropub. Is there a reason why this has been brought back here today without the information on why the giant Goram would not be viable?
Yeah, so they've undertaken a viability exercise based on the which is included in the policy, which kind of compares the potential viability of the giant Goram against the potential viability of the micropub. So they've suggested that the provision of the micropub is likely to be more viable than the giant Goram. That's the outcome of that. However, this isn't something that is suggested in the policy. In terms of the policy, the viability test only applies to the viability of the existing facility. So you ask for an exercise to be done that's kind of outside of the policy test.
That seems like a loophole.
Okay. Any other questions? Guy, you were next, weren't you?
Sorry, I'm becoming slightly worried that some sort of miscommunications happened here. Just for the benefit of clarity, what is the relevance of the micropub to the situation in front? Because my reading of policy DM6, it makes it really clear, an established pub, a proposal involving the loss of an established pub needs to beat those two tests. I do not see the relevance of a micropub at all. It doesn't refer, it isn't the established pub. Is it that it's some sort of mitigation? Is it, I don't, yeah.
So in terms of DM6, there's two tests, it's either or. So one is that you demonstrate that the existing pub is not viable, which we consider provided enough, or they demonstrate there's an alternative provision. So normally that would be an alternative provision in the locality. In this case, there isn't one. However, the case we're making here is that the alternative provision of the micropub meets the test of DM6 because they're providing a pub on site.
For clarity then, apologies, the hypothetical pub that would meet the test, does the planning consent compel them to build and operate the micropub?
Yes.
As in, once the micropub was there, it couldn't be closed down, it would have to be built, it would have to operate. Because my impression was that there's a planning consent, it's not, yeah.
I mean, there's conditions on if it was approved, there's conditions there to enable the facilitation that the micropub is built. So, for example, it's part of the permission, but essentially there's conditions on there that ensure that it's built out prior to, for example, occupation of the residential units. So they wouldn't be able to really properly proceed with the development without actually building out the facility of the micropub. Also marketing as well. It's conditioned that it's marketed appropriately for a period before the residential units are occupied.
Okay. Do you want to come back, Guy?
So I get that they would have to build it. They'd have to build the scheme. They wouldn't be able to build the residential element until they'd built the building, as it were, that's on the plans. But the policy was intended to protect pubs, and the test was, well, if there's another pub nearby, then the loss isn't so great. In this case, the applicant is saying, seemingly, no, that what this pub was providing will continue to be provided by this other thing that we promise we will build and operate and deliver. And whilst I can see that the planning consent would compel them to build the building, I don't see how it would compel them to operate the pub, as in what has been lost. I don't think planning consent could compel the operation of a business in that way.
Yeah, I think it would be outside the scope of the planning condition to sort of compel them, to actually sort of pour the first pint, as it were. I think essentially in terms of sort of, securing the physical works, that is covered by the conditions that have been recommended, but in terms of actually then kind of operating, that's outside the scope of sort of planning control, I would say.
George and then Zoe, I think.
So I can't remember the clarification last time, and are we saying that a micropub pub? Yes. Okay. Thank you. That's my question.
Okay.
So, under BCS 21, the development urban design, which the proposal definitely is, but it also says that it should contribute positively to the area's character and identity. The current design is not really in keeping with its surroundings, nor does it retain any of the historical character of the Goram giant. Why was such a jarring design chosen?
I'm not sure the case officer can answer why a design was chosen. It's
not in keeping with BCS 21. It's not.
So I suppose what you're asking is do you feel it is in keeping with BS 20?
In terms of design evaluation, we feel that the proposed design is in keeping with the wider street scene and the kind of residential character of the area.
Have you been to the local area?
Yes.
Do you think that the proposal looks like the buildings around it?
It doesn't replicate the existing housing.
It doesn't replicate the existing housing, but do you think that it looks, or do you think that it fits the vibe of Lawrence Weston and the houses around it?
I mean, the feeling is that...
your answers aren't convincing me that you've been there.
Right.
I live
He just
there.
said he'd been there, so
No,
let's
I know,
try and
but it's
see what we think. Things are good faith.
completely different. It's somewhere it looks like you'd expect to see it on a university campus. It's not somewhere where you'd go for a pub, and watch a football match or something as a family.
I mean, at the moment we've got a car park it's got a building that kind of doesn't really sit with the character of the residential buildings. There could be that argument made.
But that's not this application, is it?
Yeah, but in terms of the design, it's felt that there was a harm to the wider street scene. Essentially, you've got a corner plot that's slightly higher. It creates a kind of focal point there with some landscaping, which is in contrast to the kind of stark nature of the hard standing around the existing building. It's felt that there's no harm in terms of that wider design to the street scene.
Further to that point, I suppose, it's not for us here to say whether or not the building was willfully deteriorated or not to ensure deterioration. However, it is a little shocking that none of the original features could be retained and that the recommendation is for the whole demolition of the building, and there are no historical parts that are salvageable.
Yeah, I think that relates mainly to the siting of the pub as it is. It's kind of set back quite deep into the site, and therefore it doesn't really maximise the efficiency of the site in terms of development. So if you were to incorporate any features of it, it'd be fairly difficult to do that given the setback, because you want to obviously develop the site to its potential.
Okay, Serena, you've not spoken yet, so Serena and then George, is that right?
Can I just confirm that the micro pub, although we're saying it's technically a pub, we're not saying it isn't going to be providing facilities, is it? In a similar manner to other pubs in the area?
Well, in terms of the size, it's not going to have a skittle alley or maybe darts. Obviously, that wouldn't really be practical. However, we've been told by the developer that they're potentially going to allow use by community groups. We had Nick Bracey speak earlier. He suggested a peppercorn rent that's been made available to the community. So offers have been made to kind of incorporate it with the wider community. There's no reason why this provision wouldn't involve community use as much as the previous use. Obviously, it's on a smaller scale, and the kind of decision you need to make today is whether you feel that it's going to provide an alternative provision to what we have currently.
That's my question, in that it isn't big enough. It's a tiny pub by definition. That therefore I would ask or query whether it can provide community facilities provided by a traditional pub in that area. It's not a micro pub location. We're not talking about Gloucester Road or another location like that. I don't see how it's comparable to a pub. And therefore it does, to my mind, it fails that second limb of the DM6. That was a question. The other question I have is that there seems to be quite a serious mistake, and I'm not sure I'm right here, but it says on page 98, Lawrence Western Planning Forum didn't object. Was that right?
Yeah, I think that's covered in the amendments.
Back to us to a grave mistake, isn't it?
Yeah, because we used the original report, and then there's an amendment sheet following that, which covers that issue. So that the amendment sheets in the next appendix. And
well, I'm just checking because I think
that was an error that we've covered previously.
Okay, it's a bit misleading, I think, and some of the way it's written is misleading when we're considering what we're doing. So it says, page 94, a lack of evidence provided. I was just saying it's slightly misleading, and it's the way it's written and doesn't quite stack up, in my view.
Your first question, what were you asking there? Sorry, I missed what you...
Trying to just explore whether a micro pub, although it's technically a pub, can provide community facilities in the manner that meets the requirements of DM6. Because when we're talking about there not being any pubs offering community facilities nearby, which there aren't, if this pub goes, that's quite an important consideration. I don't see how a micro pub can do that.
Is that a question?
Yes.
Do you want to engage with that, Conrad's?
Yeah, I mean, all I'll say is, obviously, in terms of size, it limits what can be done internally in the building, but in terms of opening it up to community groups, the offer's been made. So in terms of that offer, there's no reason why it cannot provide a use for community groups.
I don't see how, I'm just going on that theme, though, that surely if you just have a few bar stools, pub, how can it comparable community facilities?
Okay, I think we've got I think people have understood that question, and there's an response. I've got George, and then Zoe, and I'm minded we need to move on to the debate because we're not even past the questions here. Come on.
Yeah, I want to hold off my question till the. Thank you.
Guys, is it a question? Yeah.
Was just, if I may, Chair, to remind members that the Council is expected to act consistently in the way that it produces these reports and the way that it assesses applications. It is not with all due respect to all members of this committee, it's not for the officer to decide how they present this, they're bound by policy to present reports in the way they are, and they are sometimes, believe me, I feel this as much as anyone, they can seem really unusual and misleading and all over the place. I wouldn't want anyone to take that as criticism of the officer concerned. I think the report has been done well, given the situation that we're in, and I wouldn't want that to be something that stood, and I just felt that that should be clarified.
So that was more of a statement than a question, but okay.
Page 213, it says that the application would not have any significant adverse impacts upon those with protected characteristics. But will this have a bathroom?
Toilet.
A toilet, essentially?
We haven't got the full fit out for the internal. I would assume that, yes, maybe a provision of a toilet.
Will it have wheelchair access toilets?
I would assume that we would have that, given its level, and there's no reason why that couldn't be provided at the site.
And because it's a small pub, it's going to be really small. If you've got several people there in there already, is it going to actually be accessible for someone in a wheelchair? Are they going to be able to get round the pub easily?
Yeah, I mean it's not that small. I mean, obviously you can get bigger pubs where you've got like a narrow corridor where you've got to walk past, and equally you can have similar issues. So I don't see why, for any reason, they cannot facilitate proper access for impaired mobility. So yeah, I don't see that being a concern of the proposal, really. We could add conditions on there to explore that if required.
Okay.
I have one more bit.
Okay, yeah, very last thing.
I promise I'm done.
Okay.
Micro pub, there's no pub within Lawrence Weston within a 15-minute walking distance. Bear in mind, again, that many of our residents are elderly and disabled, and we have a lot of hills in our area. In the previous application, I know it's not a material consideration, but I just want to note it. We looked at, if it has a dartboard or outside seating, and because that's what the previous pub offered, and if it was outside of 800 metres, then it was deemed as, that's not good enough. With this situation, obviously it's a micro pub, it's not going to be offering the same as an actual pub would, and the nearest pub that would provide those amenities would be 1,287 metres away, and again up hills and stuff. So it seems that it wouldn't. Would you say that it actually? There doesn't seem consistency with the way that things are looked at.
I don't see any issue in terms of consistency. We've done the evaluation of alternate provision in the area. There isn't suitable outside of this site. So we've applied that test as per DM6 and looked at alternative provision. So we concluded there isn't one. What we're considering here is the alternative provision on site. Do we feel that there is a suitable alternative provision of the proposed micropub?
Okay, we are going to move to the debate now. I don't have any questions because I had them all answered last time, and I know what I think about this in terms of the content. I would start by saying the reason we deferred it was to come up with refusal reasons. It's simply for them to provide information, approving the non-viability of a pub at the site, which they haven't done, I don't think. So that's where I'd start the debate. I think they haven't proven the non-viability of a pub at the site. Anyone else want to contribute to the debate? George, and then Al.
I think the public here today, all of them, most of them, saying that they would like to see the Giant Goram reinstated as a pub, not a microbrewery, means to me that there would be custom at the pub And I think the area of which it is in is I don't think I've seen the viability of a microbrewery in that area. Sorry, micropub in that area, because if there's less seating capacity, the prices will have to be more expensive, and I think the what defines a pub to me would be cheap drinks and a TV and a bar, yeah, a pool table maybe. I just don't see that a micropub fits all of those criteria. Thank you.
Al's next.
Thanks. Still unconvinced that the giant Goram would be unviable, and I believe that the cons of losing a community asset would still outweigh the benefits of 8 new dwellings. I am very glad that the developer has taken the time to speak to the community and take their thoughts into consideration, whilst also finally securing the perimeter of the pub to prevent further break-ins. However, on this occasion, I believe that the community has made their voices heard. For the above reasons, I will be refusing the application due to it being a notable loss of a prominent community asset that forms part of the town's culture and history. It acts as a place for old and young, able and disabled to get together, and strengthens the community bonds, which the planned replacement would just not provide in the same capacity.
Thanks, Al. I'm not sure who was next. I think maybe Guy, and then I think Katya, then Richard.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try and keep this as brief as I possibly can. I concur exactly with Councillor Callaghan's point. The micropub, to me, does not provide an adequate replacement. So it fails that element of DM6. I want to take the applicant's viability statement at its strongest, right? The document from Savills, I would say, is arguably the strongest argument they've made for the non-viability of what's there currently. When you look through that document, firstly, it clashes quite dramatically with what we've heard from members of the public, both at the previous hearing and this one. Some of the costings that are assumed in that model are, I would love to find a pub in this sort of location that was doing a pint for £3.50, but I suspect I won't, and I suspect the income has been underestimated, and equally the costs include things like Sky TV, entertainment budget. These are nice to haves, but once you remove those two, the pub is breaking even. I think this pub could be perfectly viable. I think if what we were seeing here was an application to retain the existing floor space of the pub, the existing amenities of the pub, and residential on top, to provide some sort of additional either rental income or sales income to generate capital to do the refurbishment work, you could absolutely have a viable pub here. The camera assessment says so, and frankly, one of the elements of the Savile viability report does a really, really good job, I think, of making the case. I hate to say, it includes a load of pictures of pubs that are outside of walking distance, certainly from the Giant Goram. They're not close enough to replace the pub that's there already, but what they do demonstrate is that there are viable pubs all over this part of the city that serve their neighbourhoods like this pub could have and would have had it not been allowed to get into the state that it's in. So I, for one, am in the same mindset as I was at the end of the previous meeting. We chose to defer to give the applicant the opportunity to come back with greater reasons as to why the premises would not be economically viable. They haven't produced additional information, I think, to persuade me that that pub would not be economically viable. I'm still voting to refuse on grounds of DM6. I urge the rest of the committee to do the same. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to take Katia and then Richard, I think, were the two that I saw.
I don't want to go. I just wanted to say that when I came back here, I was hoping, because he'd met with the community, that there was going to be some sort of working out and we're going to find a solution to this problem. I don't buy that the micro pub is replacement for a community pub. I really don't. I'm sorry. I'm trying really hard to think how it could be. He's put some tables outside, that's it. But a community pub to me does a lot of things. I'm just thinking of one in my ward, actually, which was an old pub. And it runs markets, it has yoga classes upstairs, it does all sorts of different things, which what I would see as a local community pub, which a micro pub can't do. It's basically, in Europe, that would be a coffee shop because you're allowed to serve alcohol in a coffee shop.
Okay, thank you. Richard.
Like Katja, I'll be pretty brief in my case, because I don't see the point of enjoying the fate of the 7th Cavalry at the Little Bighorn. But with respect, Chairman, your summation of why we differed was slightly inaccurate. Members did express those two concerns you mentioned, and we sent officers away to look at those areas and to see whether we could sustain reasons for actually refusal on that basis. They came back and said, based upon their professional experience and knowledge, they couldn't. They recommended approval, but were we minded to go that route, they gave us the grounds. What I would just say, and I don't intend to repeat my comments last time, but we heard in the public forum that there was an over-provision of housing locally. Well, that may come as news to the 22,000 people on the Bristol social housing list. It may come as news to the thousands of people seeking private rented accommodation. We do have a crisis, a housing crisis in this city, and it may be small, but provision of these 8 dwellings in this neighbourhood, plus a sustainable, financially sustainable micro pub backed by Nick Brace's offers to the local community seems to be the only chance of rescuing the situation. Otherwise, we're going to see the Giant Goram being an eyesore for years to come, sadly.
Thank you. Mrs. Zoe next.
Also going to keep it very short because I'm sure we're all very tired. There's no point me echoing the points that everyone else has said. It's not going to sufficiently replace the needs of the local community. There's not enough alternative provisions that would provide access within a reasonable distance. I'm not convinced that it would provide appropriate accommodations to those who have disabilities. However, because I am also very aware that we need to keep it to the reasonable reasons for refusal, I will be not voting for this on the grounds that there has not been sufficient evidence provided that the pub as is well, with renovations, would be economically viable, and that the benefits of the proposal do not outweigh the harm.
Thank you. I think we've come... Okay, one more person. Rena, go for it.
Brief, I promise. I know everyone's really tired. I appreciate everybody here. Just to say, to my mind, if technically a micropub is not a pub in the sense that this community needs a pub, and I think that the proposal fails both DM6 limbs. Most importantly, it's not going to provide those community facilities that are so badly needed, and the evidence is just not there. It just doesn't stack up. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I think we need to there. The next of the meeting is to go to, well, on my little diagram here, stage 5. I'm going to read this out. So the chair will either move a motion in accordance with the recommendation. So the recommendation in this case from the officer is to approve the application, or seek another member of the committee to do this. So I'm seeking another member of the committee to do this. Okay, is there a seconder for that proposal? No, so we don't hear that proposal. I would like to suggest that we move to refuse the application in line with the reasons given in the officer's report, if we are minded to do so.
Second.
Who would like to second that? Oh, I think I got there first this time, actually. I will just go around and ask how people are voting on that. So if you're voting to refuse the application, you will say you are for. If you are voting to reject that proposal, you're voting against. Okay? So,
Against.
For.
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 for. So the application is refused. I think that concludes the meeting. Thank you everyone for your... Thank you everyone for your patience, and I particularly thank the people who've returned to this committee, despite the fact, I would argue, we had this decision last time. And I think there's something that needs to be said about that, about the fact that we've made you come all the way back in to talk about this, which is of great importance to the local community, and yet we've been asked to come back and review what we effectively made as a decision. So I will be looking at that and thinking about how we can change that. Thank you.